Long before pyramids rose in the jungles, the seeds of civilization took root in the soils of Mesoamerica. Between 700 and 2000 BCE, the lands that would one day cradle the great cities of the Maya were inhabited by mobile hunter-gatherer groups, organized in small kin-based bands. Archaeological surveys across the lowlands of Guatemala, Belize, and southern Mexico reveal a mosaic of environmental zones, tropical forests, limestone uplands, and fertile river valleys, each shaping distinct patterns of subsistence. The transition from foraging to agriculture did not occur abruptly. It was a gradual adaptation to the Holocene climate stabilization that followed the Pleistocene's volatile shifts. As rainfall increased and seasonal cycles became predictable, humans began to domesticate local flora, including early forms of maize, Z-maize, beans, and squash, alongside manioc and chili peppers. Archaeologists at Guelanacuitz in Oaxaca and sites such as Belmopan in Belize have traced the earliest domesticated maize to around 5000 BCE. Genetic analyses confirm its evolution from the wild teosinte grass, native to central Mexico. This botanical innovation transformed subsistence patterns. Food storage and sedentary settlement became viable, enabling higher population densities. The first permanent hamlets appeared near rivers and swamps, where irrigation and soil renewal were possible. Excavations at Cuello in northern Belize uncovered circular huts, storage pits, and middens dating to around 1200 BCE, among the earliest known sedentary communities in the Maya lowlands. This agricultural foundation fostered experimentation in pottery and food preparation. The earliest ceramics of the Mesoamerican region, simple, hand-modeled vessels with fiber temper, reflect technological innovation driven by cooking and storage needs. At Paso de la Ramada in Chiapas, dated to circa 1400 BCE, archaeologists identified communal buildings with raised earthen platforms and early examples of public architecture. Such developments suggest social coordination beyond the household level. The construction of shared structures required collective labor, indicating emerging leadership roles and nascent forms of community governance. Trade and interaction between early farming communities accelerated cultural convergence. Obsidian tools found at Cuello originated from highland Guatemala, demonstrating long-distance exchange. This movement of materials and ideas facilitated the spread of agricultural techniques, ceramic styles, and ritual practices. The pattern of early interregional exchange prefigured the dense trade networks of the later Classic Maya period. Interpretively, this illustrates a systemic relationship between ecological adaptation and social complexity. As agricultural productivity rose, the surplus allowed individuals to specialize in craft, ritual, and leadership, laying the foundation for institutional development. By 1500 BCE, Mesoamerica's first ceremonial centers began to emerge. At sites such as Chiapa de Corzo and San Jose Magoti, archaeologists uncovered low platforms aligned to solar orientations, marking early attempts to integrate cosmology into built space. These alignments indicate that observation of celestial cycles, crucial for agricultural timing, had already acquired religious and administrative significance. In this period, ritual and astronomy became intertwined. The recording of time through early calendrical notations, found in symbols incised on ceramics, hints at the intellectual traditions that would later flourish in Maya hieroglyphic astronomy. Shared iconographic motifs began to spread across the region, including serpent imagery and masks with cleft heads or maze symbolism, precursors to the Olmec and later Maya pantheons. These early ritual forms demonstrate that symbolic systems were evolving alongside economic organization. They also highlight the emergence of a priestly or shamanic class responsible for mediating between agricultural cycles and cosmic order. Such developments reveal the deep cultural continuity that connected the earliest village farmers to later dynastic priest-kings. From a systemic perspective, this era represents the foundation of the Mesoamerican cultural sphere. The triad of agricultural innovation, ritual expression, and social coordination created a self-reinforcing framework for civilization. Reliable food production allowed for sustained population growth, communal architecture encouraged social cohesion, and shared ideology bound communities into wider cultural networks. This process was neither linear nor uniform. Environmental constraints and regional variability shaped distinct trajectories across the highlands and lowlands. Yet the structural logic was consistent. Stability encouraged settlement, settlement encouraged hierarchy, and hierarchy required symbols of legitimacy. By the end of the second millennium BCE, Mesoamerica had entered the pre-classic horizon, an era defined by sedentary villages, organized trade, and proto-urban planning. Archaeological stratigraphy from multiple sites confirms an acceleration of construction activity and population concentration. These developments demonstrate a critical threshold in human organization: the shift from subsistence-oriented communities to socially complex societies with enduring architectural and ideological legacies. As agriculture, trade, and ritual intertwined, the first hints of what would become Maya civilization began to take recognizable form. Linguistic and material evidence suggests that within these networks, distinct cultural identities were crystallizing, identities that would soon define one of the most enduring civilizations of the ancient world. As the landscape filled with settled villages, cultural patterns began to differentiate, and the earliest Maya identities emerged. In the Guatemalan highlands, a linguistic map was forming, the ancestral voice of the Maya world. Between 2000 and 1000 BCE, Mesoamerica entered a transformative era of cultural and linguistic diversification. As early agricultural villages expanded, regional identities began to crystallize, particularly in the southern highlands of modern Guatemala. It was here that the ancestral Maya took shape, not as a unified polity, but as a constellation of interrelated communities connected by shared ancestry, language, and trade. Linguistic reconstructions using comparative methods trace this evolution to a single Proto-Maya tongue, likely spoken in the western Guatemalan highlands around 2000 BCE. From this nucleus, successive migrations and isolations produced major branches: Huastecan, Yucatecan, Secholan-Celtalan, Kichin, and Mamian. Each branch developed distinct dialects and vocabulary tied to its local ecology and material culture. The linguistic distribution mirrors archaeological evidence of settlement dispersion. Highland sites such as Caminaljuyu, along with lowland centers like Chiapa de Corzo, demonstrate early regional differentiation. Excavations at Caminaljuyu reveal stratified communities engaged in specialized craft production and long-distance exchange, while Chiapa de Corzo displays early public architecture and evidence of elite burial. The correlation between linguistic diversity and socio-political complexity suggests that as populations expanded, localized hierarchies emerged, promoting administrative and ritual specialization. The Proto-Maya speech community thus evolved in tandem with expanding trade and social stratification, a process observable in both artifact typologies and linguistic change. Archaeologists have identified multiple interaction spheres connecting these early Maya ancestors to other emerging Mesoamerican cultures. Foremost among these were the Olmec centers of San Lorenzo and La Venta on the Gulf Coast, active between 1500 and 400 BCE. Olmec-style iconography, such as the cleft-headed were-jaguar motif, jade figurines, and basalt monuments, appears across the Guatemalan highlands during this period. The diffusion of these motifs was not the result of conquest but of sustained contact and mutual exchange. According to most interpretations, the Olmec were not overlords but participants in a shared ideological network, a formative Mesoamerican world system unified by ritual symbols, trade routes, and calendrical experimentation. Caminaljuyu provides critical archaeological confirmation of this interaction. Artifacts including carved stele, jade beads, and imported obsidian demonstrate participation in trans-regional exchange, extending hundreds of kilometers. Petrographic and trace element analyses link obsidian at Caminaljuyu to the highland sources of El Chale and San Martin Jalotepec, indicating controlled trade networks. Similarly, the presence of Olmec-style jade masks and figurines made from Motagua Valley jadeite points to shared aesthetic and religious values centered on fertility and divine kingship. These exchanges did more than move goods. They transmitted ideas. Through them, concepts of sacred rulership, architectural planning, and cosmological representation spread into the emerging Maya heartland. The development of hierarchical societies within this network is evident in burial patterns and monumental construction. At both Caminaljuyu and Chiapa de Corzo, archaeologists uncovered elite tombs accompanied by offerings of jade, obsidian, and shell ornaments, markers of social rank. Public platforms and causeways suggest coordinated labor and centralized decision-making. These sites demonstrate the rise of chiefdom-level governance, where hereditary leaders managed both trade and ritual. Such authority relied on the ability to organize economic exchange and mediate between humans and gods, an early expression of the divine kingship that would later define the classic Maya. In linguistic terms, this period likely witnessed the semantic expansion of vocabulary relating to hierarchy, trade, and agriculture. Proto-Maya root reconstructions include terms for lord, market, cow, and cornfield, indicating both subsistence and social vocabulary had become more complex. The emergence of shared calendrical terminology further suggests growing sophistication in timekeeping and astronomy. These linguistic developments parallel the archaeological evidence of administrative control, implying that language itself evolved as an instrument of governance and ritual communication. Interpretively, the Proto-Maya horizon illustrates the deep interdependence of cultural, linguistic, and economic systems. The spread of trade networks reinforced linguistic cohesion, while linguistic differentiation allowed for localized cultural identity within a broader shared matrix. The relationship between the highland and lowland zones was dynamic. Highland centers such as Caminaljuyu produced prestige goods, while lowland regions developed agricultural surpluses and emerging ceremonial centers. This division of labor created a balanced interregional economy that sustained population growth and cultural innovation. By the end of the second millennium BCE, the Proto-Maya world exhibited clear signs of organized religion and symbolic thought. Stelae and altars carved with early iconographic forms demonstrate a shared cosmology emphasizing fertility, maize, and celestial cycles. Such motifs, while still abstract, foreshadow the later Maya pantheon and its association with agriculture and kingship. The presence of early astronomical alignments at sites such as La Blanca and Tocalacabad shows that highland elites were already embedding cosmic order into civic design. Through this process, religious authority became institutionalized, a mechanism that would sustain governance in the centuries to follow. From a broader analytical perspective, the Proto-Maya era represents a decisive stage in the evolution of complex society. Environmental adaptation, agricultural productivity, and linguistic diversification intersected to create stable, self-reinforcing systems. Leadership structures emerged from economic necessity, while ritual formalized collective identity. Archaeological and linguistic evidence together demonstrate that the Maya did not appear suddenly. They were the culmination of millennia of gradual organization, technological exchange, and intellectual adaptation. By 1000 BCE, these interconnected societies stood on the threshold of urbanization. Their languages, institutions, and belief systems were already well developed, awaiting the consolidation that would define the pre-classic Maya civilization. The ceremonial centers that soon arose in the lowlands were not spontaneous creations but the logical outcome of these formative centuries of cultural evolution. These interconnected societies soon developed permanent ceremonial centers that foreshadowed the great cities to come. From scattered hamlets, stone began to climb toward the sky. Between 1000 and 400 BCE, the transformation of the Maya landscape accelerated into a period of architectural ambition and political consolidation. Communities that had once consisted of small agricultural villages evolved into regional centers with monumental construction, formalized governance, and religious hierarchy. This period, the middle to late pre-classic, marks the first unmistakable emergence of Maya civilization as a distinct and organized system. Archaeological surveys across the Petén Basin, northern Guatemala, and Chiapas indicate that settlements such as Nacbe, El Mirador, and Ceival were no longer mere villages. They were urban polities sustained by coordinated labor and central authority. LiDAR mapping and stratigraphic excavations reveal the spatial logic of these new centers. At Nacbe, Monumental triadic complexes were constructed around elevated plazas, featuring a dominant central pyramid flanked by two smaller structures, a pattern later replicated throughout the Maya world. The triadic form is interpreted as a symbolic representation of cosmological balance, likely reflecting mythic narratives related to creation and resurrection. Radiocarbon dating places Nakbi's construction phases between 800 and 400 BCE, establishing it as one of the earliest known examples of Maya urban planning. The sheer volume of fill and stone used implies thousands of organized workers, suggesting the presence of leadership capable of mobilizing labor on a regional scale. El Mirador, located just north of Nakbi, reached even greater complexity by the late pre-classic period. Covering nearly 16 square kilometers, it was dominated by the massive Danta and Tigre pyramid complexes, among the largest in the ancient world. Excavations led by Richard Hansen and colleagues have documented extensive causeways, Sakbiab, connecting major precincts, artificial reservoirs for water management, and centralized administrative zones. Soil and pollen analysis confirms intensive maize agriculture in the surrounding lowlands, supporting a large population. The city's scale, organization, and integration of hydraulic infrastructure indicate that by 400 BCE, the Maya had achieved a mature form of state-level governance. Pottery sequences from these sites provide further chronological precision. The Chicanal ceramic complex, widespread across the lowlands, exhibits uniformity in form and decoration, thin-walled bowls and red-slip jars, reflecting cultural cohesion and interregional communication. Such stylistic consistency suggests the existence of elite exchange networks maintaining both artistic standards and political alliances. The appearance of standardized iconography on ceramics and stele, including depictions of rulers, deities, and calendrical motifs, marks the institutionalization of dynastic identity. This development signifies not only artistic sophistication but also a shift in social order. Authority was now legitimized through divine descent and public display. Epigraphic fragments and early glyphic notations from sites such as San Bartolo provide direct evidence of intellectual innovation. The murals at San Bartolo, dated to approximately 100 BCE, depict mythological scenes involving the maize god and ritual kingship, accompanied by early hieroglyphic captions. These inscriptions, among the oldest known in the Maya script, demonstrate that the core principles of royal ideology, sacred kingship, calendrical ritual, and cosmic renewal, were already firmly established in the pre-classic world. They reveal that literacy was an elite monopoly, serving to record dynastic legitimacy and to synchronize political power with cosmological time. The scale and coordination evident in these pre-classic centers imply not only political organization but also ideological integration. The replication of triadic pyramids, E-group astronomical complexes, and ceremonial plazas across distant sites reflects a shared architectural grammar rooted in religious cosmology. Alignments with solstices and equinoxes, confirmed by LIDAR and archaeoastronomical analysis, indicate that the regulation of time and agriculture had become a public duty of rulers. By constructing cities that mirrored the heavens, Maya leaders materialized cosmic order in stone, reinforcing their authority as intermediaries between humans and the divine. From an analytical perspective, the rise of these settlements demonstrates the emergence of systemic governance. Agricultural surpluses supported specialists in construction, art, and administration. Centralized coordination allowed the maintenance of water reservoirs and causeways. The distribution of prestige goods such as jade, obsidian, and marine shell, found in elite burials, illustrates the existence of long-distance trade controlled by ruling lineages. These dynamics show that by the end of the pre-classic period, Maya political systems had achieved institutional stability based on three interlocking foundations: economic control, religious legitimacy, and monumental architecture. By 400 BCE, many of these pre-classic cities began to decline, possibly due to resource depletion or political realignment. Yet their legacy persisted. The triadic temple form, hieroglyphic script, and conception of divine kingship would all be adopted and elaborated upon by the classic Maya centuries later. The cities of the pre-classic age thus served as the architectural and ideological prototypes for the great dynastic capitals to come, from Tikal and Calakmul to Copan and Palenque. These developments mark the conclusion of the Maya's formative epoch. The transition from agrarian villages to organized urban polities represents one of the most significant thresholds in Mesoamerican history, the point at which the Maya world assumed the structural characteristics of civilization. With cities rising and rulers emerging, the Maya world entered its formative political age. In the rainforest, power found its first symbols, temples that mirrored heaven itself. Between 400 BCE and 150 CE, the foundations of Maya political civilization solidified. Across the lowlands of northern Guatemala and southern Mexico, scattered ceremonial centers evolved into stratified city-states ruled by hereditary kings. This was the age when divine kingship first appeared in architecture, iconography, and inscription, when power became not only organized but sacralized. The landscapes of El Mirador, San Bartolo, and Nakbi reveal that by the turn of the first millennium BCE, Maya rulers had begun to project authority through monumental design and mythic lineage. Archaeological evidence from El Mirador illustrates this transformation vividly. The city's Danta pyramid complex, rising more than 70 meters above the forest canopy, remains one of the largest man-made structures in the ancient world. Constructed over successive phases between 300 BCE and 100 CE, it embodied the fusion of urbanism and theology. Its triadic arrangement, a central temple flanked by two smaller shrines, symbolized the sacred mountain of creation, linking the ruler's authority with cosmic order. Excavations reveal layers of fine stucco, ritual offerings, and dedicatory caches placed beneath temple floors, all designed to sanctify the structure as a living manifestation of divine power. Nearby, San Bartolo offers a complementary glimpse into the ideological fabric of this emerging order. Discovered in 2001, the site's murals, dated to around 100 BCE, depict the maize god's rebirth, bloodletting rituals, and enthroned rulers participating in sacred renewal. Accompanying glyphs, among the earliest known examples of Maya writing, identify these scenes with divine lineages, suggesting that the institution of kingship was already mythologically anchored. The combination of text and image here marks a watershed moment. Political authority had become inseparable from religious cosmology, and the ruler's body served as the vessel through which the gods acted in the world. Epigraphic fragments from Caminaljuyu, Chiapa de Corzo, and Takalikabaj further attest to the spread of dynastic governance. Early stelae inscribed with emblematic titles, such as Ajah, Lord, and Keuhula Jah, Divine Lord, reveal a linguistic codification of hierarchy. Genealogical records, though fragmentary, indicate that rulers justified their legitimacy through descent from supernatural ancestors, particularly the maize god, the sun god, or the hero twins of the Popol Vuh tradition. This ideology of sacred kingship gave cohesion to rapidly expanding polities, transforming them from loosely organized chiefdoms into enduring dynasties. Urban development reflected these new hierarchies. Cities were carefully planned, with causeways, sakbiab, linking temple groups, palaces, and administrative quarters. These raised limestone roads symbolized political integration as much as practical connectivity, binding ritual spaces into a coherent civic network. At El Mirador, the principal causeways extended for kilometers, connecting satellite sites like Nakbi and Tintal, an embryonic form of regional governance. Hydraulic infrastructure, including artificial reservoirs and channel systems, further illustrates centralized planning. The construction and maintenance of such features required sustained labor coordination, implying a permanent bureaucratic apparatus beneath the royal court. Material culture reinforces this picture of complexity. The ceramics of the late pre-classic, notably the Chicanal style, became increasingly standardized across the lowlands, indicating shared artistic conventions under elite patronage. Elaborate polychrome vessels depict ritual processions and enthroned figures, offering glimpses of early court life. Jade ornaments, obsidian blades, and shell inlays found in elite tombs demonstrate long-distance trade networks that extended to the Motagua Valley, the Gulf Coast, and even the Pacific, Such exchanges were managed through both political alliances and ceremonial diplomacy, rituals that reaffirmed the sacred obligations binding ruler to ruler, city to city. Architecture, art, and inscription thus functioned as instruments of ideology. The ruler's palace rose beside the temple not merely for convenience but to assert the unity of political and cosmic realms. Public plazas became stages for calendrical rites, bloodletting, dance, and the scattering of incense, through which rulers reenacted the creation of the world. By synchronizing political ceremony with astronomical observation, early Maya kings embodied the axis between earth and sky. Their authority was measured not only by conquest but by their ability to ensure harmony between human society and the divine order of time. Yet the emergence of kingship also brought tension. The concentration of power in divine rulers introduced competition among polities. Archaeological traces of fortifications at some sites, as well as burned temple layers, suggest episodes of conflict during the late pre-classic collapse around 150 CE. Environmental stress, overexploitation of resources, and shifting trade routes may have weakened El Mirador's hegemony. Many great centers were abandoned, their rulers' power dissolved into the forest. But the ideological structures they created, divine kingship, monumental architecture, and dynastic ritual, endured, ready to be revived by the classic Maya centuries later. The early kings of the Maya world thus left more than monuments. They forged the blueprint of civilization itself. Their pyramids, murals, and causeways encoded a theology of power that would dominate Mesoamerica for over 1,000 years, where to rule was to mediate between heaven and earth, and where the city itself became a map of the cosmos. To sustain these cities, the Maya turned to a powerful unifying force: their religion. Time itself became sacred, a wheel of heavens inscribed in stone. By the late pre-classic period, the Maya worldview had crystallized into a complex cosmology that united nature, time, and divine agency into a single cyclical order. This worldview was not abstract theology. It structured daily life, political legitimacy, and the rhythms of agriculture. The Maya conceived the universe as a living system governed by cycles of birth, death, and renewal, principles reflected in their mythology, ritual practice, and monumental architecture. Every harvest, every coronation, and every celestial event reaffirmed the balance between the human and divine realms. Archaeological and epigraphic evidence from Izapa, Kaminaljuyu, and El Mirador demonstrates that this cosmology was already mature by 300 BCE. Stelae at Izapa, particularly Stela 25 and Stela 5, depict narrative scenes that prefigure later episodes from the Popol Vuh, including the exploits of the hero twins and the resurrection of the maize god. These motifs represent not mythology for its own sake, but the embodiment of agricultural and cosmic renewal, metaphors for the continual regeneration of life that sustained both field and kingdom. The hero twins' descent into the underworld and their triumph over death mirrored the maize seed's passage through soil to sprout anew, a cycle the Maya equated with political order and dynastic continuity. The Popol Vuh, though recorded in alphabetic script by Kitsch scribes in the 16th century, preserves themes that can be traced to the pre-classic and early classic periods. It presents creation as a process of successive failures and refinements, a cosmos shaped by divine experimentation until the correct balance of humanity, time, and ritual was achieved. The narrative's emphasis on reciprocity between humans and gods reflects a fundamental tenet of Maya religion. Existence depended on maintaining cosmic equilibrium through offerings, bloodletting, and ceremony. Archaeological contexts across the Maya region, from jade caches at Cebal to burnt copal residues in temple floors, confirm that these acts were not symbolic abstractions but continuous, material transactions with the divine. The architecture of this era encoded the same cosmological logic. Temples and pyramids were not merely political centers but artificial mountains, embodiments of the Wits, the sacred hill of creation. From these elevated structures, rulers performed rituals that reenacted the birth of the world, aligning human activity with the cycles of the heavens. Orientation studies and LiDAR analyses reveal that many ceremonial platforms were deliberately aligned to solar and Venusian events, particularly solstices and equinoxes. At Azapa, the principal mound complex faces the December solstice sunrise, while at Nakbi and El Mirador, architectural axes mark the path of the sun's zenith passage. Such alignments demonstrate not only astronomical precision but the theological conviction that sacred architecture should harmonize with cosmic geometry. The development of the calendar system further institutionalized this religious order. By the late 1st millennium BCE, the Maya had adopted and refined the Mesoamerican long count, a linear calendar that measured days from a mythic creation date equivalent to 3114 BCE. Carved stele from Chiapa de Corzo and Tocalica contain some of the earliest known long count inscriptions, providing secure chronological anchors for Maya history. These inscriptions reveal that time itself was conceived as divine substance, governed by deities associated with specific days, months, and cycles. The ritual calendar, Sokin, 260 days, and the solar calendar, Hab, 365 days, intersected in a 52-year calendar round, symbolizing the renewal of cosmic order. Each period-ending ceremony reaffirmed the ruler's duty to maintain balance between celestial cycles and human society. Religious authority thus became the foundation of political governance. Kings ruled not by coercion alone, but as custodians of time and mediators between gods and people. Their titles, often including Keuhul, meaning holy, reflected their divine function. Inscriptions from later classic periods would explicitly depict kings performing bloodletting rites, scattering incense, or conjuring ancestors from the underworld. The conceptual roots of these acts lie in the late pre-classic, when rulers first assumed the role of divine intermediaries. Their legitimacy depended on their ability to read the calendar, interpret omens, and synchronize royal ritual with celestial motion. Ritual performance itself was systematic and institutional. Ceremonial centers such as San Bartolo reveal structured sequences of preparation, offering, and renewal. Murals show attendants presenting bundles, likely containing jade or copal, to officiants engaged in sacrifice or prayer. These rites were timed to agricultural cycles, ensuring fertility and successful harvests. Archaeologists have identified caches of maize pollen and animal bones beneath temple stairways, votive deposits symbolizing nourishment returned to the gods who sustained the fields. This reciprocal exchange formed the ethical and theological core of Maya civilization. The gods maintained the world, and humanity repaid that sustenance through ceremony. The religious system also structured artistic expression. Iconography followed standardized conventions that made theological concepts visible. The four cardinal directions, represented by specific colors and deities, organized both the cosmos and urban layout. Red denoted the east, black the west, white the north, and yellow the south. A schema reflected in ceramic decoration, mural art, and the spatial orientation of civic centers. The celestial tree, Wakachan, often depicted rising from the underworld and branching toward heaven, symbolized the axis mundi, the world's central pillar connecting divine, terrestrial, and infernal realms. In art, kings frequently appear at this intersection, reinforcing their role as mediators within the cosmic order. Interpreting these patterns, scholars view Maya religion as an integrative system linking environment, astronomy, and political ideology. The cyclical conception of time provided predictability in an unpredictable landscape, a cosmological framework for agriculture in the tropics, where seasonal variation was subtle but crucial. By correlating celestial events with planting and harvest, the Maya ensured agricultural stability while embedding economic activity within sacred time. Thus, theology functioned as social infrastructure. Religion was the mechanism through which ecological adaptation became political and cultural continuity. By the end of the late pre-classic period, the fusion of ritual, kingship, and calendar had created a durable ideological structure. Even when cities like El Mirador declined around 150 CE, the intellectual and theological foundations of Maya civilization remained intact. Later centers would inherit and refine this cosmic order, embedding it into the heart of classic Maya governance and art. With a shared cosmic order in place, the Maya could organize trade and politics across distant lands. Across rivers and mountains, jade, cacao, and obsidian bound the Maya world together. By the late pre-classic period, a vast web of exchange linked the highlands and lowlands of the Maya region, transforming isolated communities into an interconnected economic and cultural system. Trade was not an incidental activity but the circulatory system of Maya civilization, carrying goods, technologies, and ideas between distant polities. From the volcanic uplands of Guatemala to the coastal plains of Belize and Campeche, routes of exchange wove together diverse landscapes and ecological zones, fostering specialization and interdependence long before the rise of imperial power. Archaeological and archaeometric research provides a detailed picture of this system. Obsidian, the sharp, volcanic glass essential for tools, ritual blades, and prestige items, offers the clearest evidence of controlled interregional distribution. Geochemical analyses using X-ray fluorescence have traced obsidian artifacts found at lowland sites such as El Mirador, Tikal, and Ceibal to highland sources at El Chale and Ixtepic. These findings indicate that by 400 BCE, obsidian was moving through organized channels, probably managed by elites or temple authorities who controlled access to raw material. The presence of standardized blade production debris at inland centers suggests not only trade but local industries dependent on imported stone, an early sign of economic integration between ecological zones. Jade functioned as the supreme symbol of status and cosmological significance. Mined from the Motagua Valley in eastern Guatemala, jade was valued for its green translucence, the color of maize, fertility, and eternal life. Artisans at Caminaljuyu and Copan crafted it into celts, pendants, and beads used in ritual deposition and elite adornment. Finished pieces found as far north as the Yucatán coast demonstrate that jade circulated across hundreds of kilometers, following exchange routes maintained through kinship, diplomacy, and ritual alliance. Some archaeologists argue that control over jade distribution may have reinforced the authority of early highland centers, whose rulers acted as intermediaries between the resource-rich mountains and the consuming lowland courts. In addition to these prestige materials, perishable commodities such as cacao, salt, cotton, and feathers formed the basis of regional economies. Residue analysis from ceramic vessels at Rio Azul has revealed traces of theobromine and caffeine, chemical markers of cacao, confirming its consumption as a ritual beverage as early as 400 BCE. Cacao held dual importance. It was a sacred offering associated with fertility and rebirth, and it also functioned as a form of currency. Its cultivation in the humid lowlands of Belize and the Usumacinta Basin supported trade with drier highland zones, where cacao could not grow. Salt, essential for diet and food preservation, moved in the opposite direction, produced along coastal lagoons and traded inland. These exchanges balanced ecological inequalities, ensuring mutual dependence between highland and lowland communities. The geography of Mesoamerica dictated the form of these networks. Major rivers, such as the Usumacinta, Pasión, and Grijalva, served as natural trade corridors, navigable by canoe for much of their length. Archaeological surveys along these river systems have uncovered port facilities, shell middens, and settlements oriented toward waterborne commerce. Inland routes followed ridgelines and valley passes, connecting major centers like Caminaljuyu, Calakmul, and the Belizean coast. The construction of raised causeways, sakbiab, in some lowland regions likely facilitated both ceremonial processions and the transport of goods between civic cores. These networks demonstrate not only logistical ingenuity but sustained interregional coordination, an infrastructure of movement that underpinned the political unification of the Maya world. Material analysis further reveals the breadth of this exchange. Marine shells from the Caribbean and Pacific coasts appear in highland tombs. Polished hematite mirrors from Oaxaca have been found in lowland caches, and figurines from the Gulf Coast display stylistic elements influenced by both Olmec and early Maya traditions. Such evidence points to cultural as well as economic contact, the diffusion of iconography, technology, and ritual practice through trade. The Jaguar and maize deity motifs appearing in highland sculpture during this era may have entered through interaction with Gulf Coast centers like La Venta, while lowland artisans adapted these symbols into distinct Maya forms. Trade, therefore, was not merely material but ideological. It transmitted the shared visual and theological language that would later unify the classic Maya world. The organization of trade likely operated through multiple layers. At the local level, household economies engaged in reciprocal exchange of food and craft goods. At the regional level, elite agents supervised long-distance commerce, often through ritualized markets or seasonal gatherings at boundary zones. Archaeological finds at sites like Cebol and San Bartolo show open plazas containing vendor-like structures and artifacts from diverse regions, implying periodic marketplaces embedded within religious festivals. These gatherings reinforced both economic and social cohesion, moments when trade, ceremony, and diplomacy merged into a single institutional practice. Ritual deposits further illustrate the sacred dimension of exchange. In many cases, imported materials were deliberately buried beneath temple floors or within caches, signifying offerings to deities rather than consumption or resale. At Tocalacabaj, jade celts and spondylus shells were interred alongside obsidian blades and ceramic effigies, a combination symbolizing the union of sea, mountain, and earth. Such assemblages suggest that trade goods themselves were viewed as divine gifts, their circulation reenacting the creative forces of the cosmos. This fusion of economy and religion reveals the depth of Maya integration. Material exchange sustained not only wealth but also cosmic balance. Analytically, the emergence of structured trade reflects the maturation of early state systems. Control over key resources and routes allowed rulers to project power beyond their immediate territories. By mediating access to obsidian or jade, elite lineages established both economic leverage and ideological legitimacy, the capacity to distribute sacred materials as symbols of divine favor. The distribution of imported goods within burials and public rituals reinforced social hierarchy, marking clear distinctions between elites and commoners. Yet it also generated shared cultural values, as objects from distant lands embodied collective identity and participation in a broader Maya world. By the end of the pre-classic period, the infrastructure of exchange had laid the economic groundwork for the classic Maya's monumental ascent. When cities such as Tikal, Calakmul, and Palenque later flourished, they inherited not only trade routes but the ideological precedent that linked commerce, ritual, and rulership into a single system. The circulation of jade, cacao, and obsidian thus represents more than the movement of goods. It signifies the creation of a unified economic and cosmological order that bound the early Maya world together. These networks created the material foundation for the classic Maya's monumental ascent. By the 3rd century CE, Maya kings carved their names into eternity. Between 250 and 600 CE, the Maya world underwent a transformation that defined the classic era. Across the lowlands of present-day Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and Mexico's Yucatán and Chiapas regions, monumental centers flourished, each ruled by dynasties that combined political authority with divine legitimacy. This was an age of consolidation. Hereditary kingship matured into institutionalized government, monumental architecture expressed state ideology, and writing and art reached their classical refinement. The scattered ceremonial centers of the pre-classic period coalesced into city-states whose rulers sought not merely to govern, but to immortalize their reigns through stone and glyph. At the forefront of this transformation stood Tikal, one of the earliest and most powerful of the classic Maya capitals. Excavations and epigraphic analysis indicate that its dynastic line began around 292 CE, when the first dated monument, Stela 29, records the reign of a ruler now known as Yax-eb-Zuk. The stela, inscribed in the fully developed hieroglyphic script, marks one of the earliest securely dated inscriptions in the Maya long count calendar, corresponding to 8.12.14.8.15, 292 CE. It stands as a declaration of dynastic permanence. From this moment, Maya rulers began to view time, lineage, and architecture as extensions of divine kingship. Tikal's rise was paralleled by the emergence of other powerful centers. Copan, in the Motagua Valley, was founded by a dynasty whose inscriptions trace descent to the early 5th century, while Palenque and Calakmul soon followed as major urban and political entities. The appearance of formal royal titles, Keuhulajaw, Holy Lord, across multiple inscriptions demonstrates the standardization of political ideology across the lowlands. Each ruler was simultaneously a sovereign and a sacred intermediary, responsible for maintaining cosmic balance through ritual and warfare. Stele, altars, and temple facades recorded these acts in exquisite detail, forming a public chronicle of power that still endures across the Maya landscape. Archaeological evidence suggests that the early classic period was also a time of intensified interregional contact. Around 378 CE, a transformative event occurred. Tikal received emissaries from the central Mexican metropolis of Teotihuacan. This episode, recorded on Tikal's Stela 31 and other monuments, describes the arrival of a figure named Siajkak, born of fire, who came from the west. The stela further records the installation of a new ruler, Yax Nun Ayin, identified as the son of spear-thrower Owl, a foreign figure associated with Teotihuacan iconography. Archaeological finds at Tikal, including Teotihuacan-style incense burners, obsidian projectile points, and murals depicting central Mexican dress, corroborate these inscriptions. The precise nature of this contact remains debated. Some scholars interpret it as a military conquest, others as a dynastic alliance or ideological exchange. Whatever the mechanism, the result was profound. Teotihuacan imagery and cosmology were integrated into Maya political expression. At Tikal and Uaxactan, depictions of the goggle-eyed storm god, Tlaloc, and the feathered serpent appear alongside traditional Maya deities, reflecting a fusion of foreign and local symbolism. The event illustrates how Maya kings adopted external models of power, incorporating them into their own theological framework. Rather than passive recipients, the Maya reinterpreted foreign influences to reinforce their divine authority. The urban fabric of the classic cities mirrored this ideological evolution. At Tikal, successive rulers commissioned towering temple pyramids aligned with celestial events. Temple I, dedicated centuries later to Jasawchan Kawil I, exemplifies this tradition, monumental architecture as a cosmic instrument. Earlier structures, such as the North Acropolis, combined royal tombs, ancestral shrines, and dynastic monuments in a single spatial composition. These complexes served both as ceremonial centers and as dynastic necropolises, physical manifestations of lineage continuity. Similar developments occurred at Copan, where the Acropolis complex expanded to include temples inscribed with detailed king lists, and at Palenque, where rulers like Kinich Janab Pakal I would later build sanctuaries designed as metaphysical portals between life and the afterworld. Art and writing reinforced this system of hereditary rule. The classic Maya hieroglyphic script reached full maturity during this era, capable of recording historical events with precision. Inscriptions documented not only calendrical dates but birth, accession, warfare, and ritual, each tied to cosmic cycles. Portraiture and sculpture and relief emphasized individual identity. Rulers are depicted with personal regalia, headdresses, and titles, signaling both divine descent and temporal achievement. The Maya thus achieved one of the most sophisticated systems of historical record in the pre-Columbian world, an integration of language, mathematics, and cosmology in service of dynastic memory. Economically, these urban centers thrived on established trade networks connecting the highlands, lowlands, and coastal regions. Jade from the Motagua Valley, obsidian from El Chale and Ixtepic, and marine shells from the Caribbean circulated through royal courts, functioning as both economic capital and ritual currency. Elite exchange supported diplomatic alliances, while surplus agricultural production sustained the labor forces that built and maintained monumental architecture. The political economy of the classic Maya rested on a delicate balance between divine kingship and the practical administration of resources, an equilibrium that would later face strain as populations expanded and rivalries intensified. Interpretively, The emergence of dynastic states marks a structural shift in Mesoamerican civilization. The pre-classic world of dispersed ritual centers gave way to a network of centralized polities, each with distinct artistic styles but unified by a shared ideological framework. Kingship became institutional, hereditary, and recorded. The city became both a stage for ritual and an archive of power. The classic Maya thus inaugurated a historical consciousness unparalleled in the ancient Americas, one that fused mythic time with lived history, inscribing both upon stone and memory. By the close of the 6th century, the political map of the lowlands had been redrawn. Tikal, Calakmul, and Copan stood as the great capitals of an increasingly interconnected world, their rulers bound by alliance, rivalry, and shared ritual responsibility. The long count calendar, once a priestly instrument, had become the timeline of dynasties. History itself had been transformed into a sacred text. The classic era had begun in full, an age where the Maya would reach their architectural, artistic, and intellectual zenith. Political power now took visible form, in architecture and art that still define the Maya legacy. Every wall, every glyph, a record of kings, gods, and time. In the classic Maya world, architecture and writing were inseparable, twin expressions of divine kingship and cosmic order. Each building, relief, and inscription formed part of a vast symbolic system, where stone spoke and space itself conveyed theology. The Maya did not merely construct cities. They inscribed their cosmology into the landscape. Palaces, temples, and plazas embodied both political authority and sacred geography, while the glyphs carved upon them preserved the rhythm of time and the legacy of rulers who saw themselves as the living axis between heaven and earth. Nowhere is this synthesis more striking than in the great ceremonial centers of Palenque, Copan, and Tikal, where art and architecture reached their classical refinement. At Palenque, nestled within the lush hills of Chiapas, the palace complex dominates the central acropolis, a labyrinth of courtyards, galleries, and elevated platforms connected by corbelled vaults and causeways. Its most iconic feature, the tower, may have functioned as both an observatory and a symbol of dynastic surveillance. Nearby rises the Temple of the Inscriptions, built to enshrine the tomb of Kinich Jenab Pakal I, R. 615 to 683 CE. Beneath its 9-tiered pyramid, Pakal's sarcophagus lid depicts him descending into the underworld and ascending the world tree, a microcosm of Maya cosmology rendered in limestone. At Copan, in modern Honduras, architectural design became a language of power and continuity. The city's acropolis evolved through successive generations, each ruler expanding upon the work of his predecessors. The hieroglyphic stairway, constructed under King Smokeshell, Kak Yipyaj Chan Kawil, in the 8th century, stands as one of the greatest written monuments of the ancient world. 63 steps, 2,200 glyph blocks, and an unbroken dynastic record spanning 400 years. As with Palenque, architecture here was not merely functional. It was a medium of history. Temples were named and dedicated to specific deities, events, and kings, their alignments and elevations designed to mirror celestial patterns. Tikal, meanwhile, transformed its monumental core into a living calendar. Its twin pyramid complexes, constructed to commemorate K8 endings, 20-year cycles in the Maya calendar, physically embodied time's passage. Each complex contained 2 facing pyramids, stelae, and altars precisely placed to record the completion of cosmic intervals. The central acropolis, a palace complex overlooking the Great Plaza, served as both royal residence and stage for ritual display. In this sacred urban geometry, the Maya ruler's body and city became extensions of the cosmos, human and architectural microcosms of divine order. The architectural vocabulary of the classic Maya combined uniform structural principles with distinct regional styles. The corbelled vault, achieved by progressively overlapping stones until they met in a pointed arch, allowed for enclosed interior chambers and ceremonial corridors. Roof combs, ornate, perforated stone structures crowning temple tops, elevated shrines toward the heavens, displaying stucco effigies of gods or ancestors. Relief panels, friezes, and painted stucco adorned facades, blending mythic narrative with political propaganda. Each capital developed its own aesthetic dialect. Palenque's refined stucco reliefs contrast with the monumental stele of Copan or the massive verticality of Tikal's temples. Yet across all sites, one principle remained constant: the inseparability of sacred narrative from spatial design. It was in this architectural theater that Maya writing achieved its full maturity. The hieroglyphic script, composed of roughly 800 signs representing syllables and logograms, reached its peak sophistication during the Classic era. While earlier inscriptions, like those from the late pre-classic site of Izapa, hinted at proto-writing, by 300 CE the script had become fully phonetic and capable of expressing complex grammar and narrative. The decipherment of this system stands as one of modern archaeology's greatest intellectual triumphs. Early attempts by 19th-century scholars such as Constantin Rafinesque and Ernst Forstmann identified calendrical elements, but it was not until the mid-20th century that the phonetic principle was confirmed. Russian linguist Yuri Norizov, working from photographs, demonstrated that the script combined logograms with syllabic signs, a discovery later expanded by Tatiana Proskoryakov, who recognized that inscriptions recorded dynastic events, births, accessions, and deaths of historical individuals. This revelation transformed Maya studies, revealing that the stele and altars long thought to depict deities were in fact commemorations of real kings and queens. Each monument thus became both artwork and document. A stela, typically carved in limestone, portrayed the ruler in ceremonial regalia, towering headdress, obsidian blade, and jade ornaments, accompanied by hieroglyphic captions listing his titles, deeds, and dates. The precision of these inscriptions allows modern scholars to reconstruct detailed royal genealogies and political histories. For instance, the lineage of Tikal's Yaks Nun Ayan to Jasauchan Kawil I is known through successive stele recording over 2 centuries of continuity. Similarly, the Copan dynasty, beginning with Kinich Yaks Kuk Amo, in 426 CE, is documented through an unbroken sequence of monuments culminating in the hieroglyphic stairway. Beyond royal propaganda, Maya inscriptions also encode profound cosmological thought. Dates correspond to positions within the long count, Sokin, and Hob calendars, interlocking cycles that map sacred and solar time. Ritual events were synchronized with celestial phenomena, particularly the movements of Venus and the solar zenith passages that defined agricultural rhythms. Thus, writing served not only as historical record but as a sacred technology for maintaining cosmic balance. Maya art, both monumental and portable, extended these same principles of symbolism and order. Painted ceramics, often found in royal tombs, depict mythological scenes, feasting rituals, and dynastic lineages in polychrome detail. Vases from the codex-style tradition of the Petan region resemble illuminated manuscripts, their painted bands functioning as visual texts. Relief carvings, like those at Yaxchilan, show rulers performing bloodletting rituals or conjuring ancestral spirits, their speech and thoughts represented as flowing hieroglyphic scrolls. Even jewelry and ritual implements carried inscriptions, transforming personal adornment into a medium of sacred communication. The integration of art, writing, and architecture reveals the Maya conception of permanence, that stone could preserve divine order across the cycles of time. The ruler's image, bound to his name in glyphic form, ensured that both human and cosmic history would be remembered. In this way, the Maya achieved a remarkable synthesis: art as theology, architecture as cosmology, and writing as the memory of the world. Yet behind the elegance of this system lay an undercurrent of competition. Every stela commemorating victory also implied an enemy's defeat. Every temple celebrating divine kingship was a statement of dominance over rival polities. As inscriptions multiplied, so too did the subtle language of war and alliance. The very medium of order began to record its own unraveling. But within this brilliant order, rivalry began to reshape the political landscape. Kings rose and fell, their triumphs etched into the very stones of their cities. By the middle centuries of the Classic period, The Maya world had become a complex geopolitical landscape, a network of autonomous kingdoms connected by alliance, marriage, and war. Each polity, ruled by a Keuhula Jah or Holy Lord, maintained its own dynastic lineage, emblem glyph, and sacred authority. Yet no city existed in isolation. Political power was relational, shaped by diplomacy and conflict across hundreds of miles of tropical lowlands. From the Petén Basin to the Usumacinta and beyond, the ambitions of rulers intertwined in cycles of conquest, submission, and resurgence that defined the classic era's political order. Among these rivalries, none proved more enduring or influential than the struggle between Tikal and Calakmul, a contest for supremacy that lasted nearly 3 centuries. Inscriptions from both kingdoms and their vassal allies record shifting alliances, military campaigns, and ritual confrontations. Tikal, located in the central Petén of modern Guatemala, had emerged as an early superpower by the 4th century CE, its rulers asserting divine descent and regional hegemony. Calakmul, positioned deep within the forests of southern Campeche, rose to prominence soon after, its dynasty identified in inscriptions as the Canul or Snake Kingdom. Each employed both military and ideological means to expand influence, asserting control through subordinate centers identified by their emblem glyphs. Epigraphic data reveal that these emblem glyphs, hieroglyphic titles denoting royal identity and territorial affiliation, were the essential markers of classic Maya geopolitics. The emblem glyph of Tikal featured the mutal sign, while Calakmul's snake emblem was associated with divine kingship and conquest. The distribution of these symbols across the Maya region allows scholars to reconstruct spheres of influence. Towns bearing the snake emblem, such as Zybanch and La Corona, functioned as nodes within Calakmul's vast alliance network. Conversely, centers like Naranjo and Dos Pilas oscillated between the Mutal and Canul factions, their loyalties shifting with the fortunes of war. The epigraphic record provides the most detailed narrative of these conflicts. Monuments such as Tikal Stela 31 describe the reign of Yax Nun Ini and his successors, documenting both victories and setbacks. At Dos Pilas, inscriptions from the reign of Balajchan Kawil, r. 648 to 692 CE, reveal how the city functioned as a Tikal offshoot before defecting to Calakmul's orbit. Archaeologists interpret this as evidence of civil strife within the Tikal dynasty itself, a dynastic fracture that reshaped regional power. Such inscriptions, cross-referenced with radiocarbon and ceramic chronologies, demonstrate that the Maya world was far from monolithic. Rather, it consisted of dynamic, interdependent centers in perpetual negotiation of power. Military activity during this period grew increasingly organized and symbolic. Relief carvings from sites such as Yaxcalan, Bonampak, and Caracol depict rulers adorned in war regalia, capturing enemies and presenting them in ritual display. Warfare, though devastating, was as much a performance of legitimacy as it was a quest for territory. Captives, often elite opponents, were paraded, sacrificed, or incorporated into marriage alliances. Hieroglyphic texts employ the verb chak, to chop, or to decapitate, as a common expression for military victory. Such imagery underscores the ritualized nature of warfare, where conflict was an extension of divine order rather than simple material contest. Caracol, a formidable rival to Tikal, illustrates the strategic and ideological dimensions of this warfare. Its ruler Lord Kintu, r. 618 to 658 CE, recorded a major victory over Tikal in 562 CE, inaugurating what scholars term the Tikal hiatus, a century-long decline in Tikal's monument building and political activity. This victory established Calakmul and its allies as the dominant force in the central lowlands for generations. Archaeological evidence from Caracol, including extensive causeways and administrative compounds, indicates that conquest brought not only plunder but also territorial governance, integrating subjugated populations into expanding regional systems. Such political structures relied on a complex web of vassalage and tribute. Subordinate cities, often smaller yet strategically located, paid homage to their patrons through labor, goods, and symbolic loyalty. The exchange of daughters in marriage alliances further reinforced diplomatic ties, merging bloodlines and divine rights. For instance, glyphic inscriptions from La Corona record the arrival of royal brides from Calakmul, affirming political cohesion through ritual union. These alliances extended over vast distances, with interactions documented between highland and lowland polities. Long-distance emissaries, possibly escorted along Sakbiab, raised causeways, maintained communication across dense forests and river valleys. The consequences of this political rivalry extended beyond the elite. Archaeological data from hinterland sites show patterns of population relocation, defensive fortification, and increased agricultural intensification during periods of sustained conflict. Settlement hierarchies became more stratified, with fortified hilltop centers guarding access to fertile basins. The proliferation of secondary sites during the 6th and 7th centuries suggests that warfare catalyzed state centralization, compelling local rulers to consolidate resources and authority. In this sense, the escalation of conflict also stimulated political innovation, as cities developed more sophisticated administrative systems and ritualized displays of sovereignty. The material traces of these struggles are extensive. At Naranjo, Stela 22 portrays Lady Six Sky, a dynastic regent sent from Dos Pilas to reassert Calakmul's influence after local upheaval. Her reign exemplifies how political continuity was maintained through dynastic restoration. Elsewhere, sites such as Quirigua and Copan reveal the tension between overlordship and rebellion. In 738 CE, Quirigua's ruler Kak, Tiliu Chan Yopat captured and executed his overlord Waxaclajuan Uba Kawil of Copan, an event recorded in striking stone imagery. Such reversals demonstrate the volatility of classic geopolitics. Even established hegemonies could collapse abruptly through internal dissent or shifting alliances. Analytically, these interpolity dynamics illustrate how ritual kingship and realpolitik coexisted within Maya statecraft. Royal authority was expressed through divine lineage and cosmic sanction, yet it was sustained through pragmatic alliances, strategic marriages, and coercive warfare. The emblem glyph system functioned as both a political language and a cartographic code, mapping the ideological boundaries of influence across Mesoamerica. Inscriptions, far from static commemorations, were active instruments of diplomacy, public declarations of legitimacy and warning. By the late 7th and early 8th centuries, the balance of power began to shift once again. Tikal, under Jasa Chan Kawil I, mounted a decisive resurgence, defeating Calakmul around 695 CE. This victory, recorded on Tikal Temple I and associated monuments, re-established Mutal's supremacy and inaugurated a new phase of monumental construction. Yet the triumph was temporary. As rival kingdoms adapted to changing circumstances, no single polity could maintain dominance indefinitely. The system's inherent competitiveness, its reliance on prestige warfare and divine kingship, ensured that equilibrium remained fragile. The cumulative effect of these rivalries was a Maya world both unified and divided. Unified by shared religion, language, and cosmology, yet divided by perpetual competition among its rulers. The inscriptions left by these kings and queens provide a remarkably detailed record of power in motion, a chronicle of ambition, alliance, and collapse written in stone. As conflict intensified, Maya society expanded in complexity, reaching its golden zenith. Amid rainforests and ridges, the Maya learned to master the land. The success of the classic Maya civilization rested on its ability to transform challenging tropical environments into productive landscapes. Across the lowlands and highlands alike, Maya farmers developed an array of agricultural strategies that maximized yield in diverse ecological zones. Through centuries of experimentation and adaptation, they turned the varied geography of Mesoamerica, limestone plateaus, karst depressions, river valleys, and seasonal wetlands, into a resilient system capable of sustaining dense urban populations. The foundations of this achievement were ecological diversity and local innovation. Archaeobotanical and sedimentary studies from the Petén Basin, Belize River Valley, and Usumacinta region reveal a mosaic of techniques adapted to microenvironments. In upland areas, the Maya practiced terracing, constructing stone retaining walls that prevented soil erosion and conserved moisture. In swampy lowlands, they engineered raised fields, platforms of fertile soil elevated above flood zones, connected by canals that regulated water flow. These hydraulic systems, visible through LiDAR imaging at sites such as Edzna and Pooltrouser Swamp, demonstrate an intricate understanding of hydrology and seasonal cycles. Far from passive cultivators of rainforest ecosystems, the Maya were skilled landscape engineers. The hydraulic infrastructure of the classic cities reflects large-scale social coordination. At Edzna, located in the Puyuk region of Campeche, archaeologists uncovered an elaborate network of canals, reservoirs, and sluices, constructed as early as the late pre-classic period. These features collected and distributed seasonal rainfall across extended fields, supporting both crops and urban populations. At Calakmul, depressions in the karstic terrain were modified into aguadas, artificial reservoirs, some capable of storing thousands of cubic meters of water. Pollen analysis and microfossil evidence suggest that maize, beans, and squash, the triad of Mesoamerican staple crops, were grown in rotational cycles alongside root crops like manioc and malanga. Such diversification reduced the risk of famine and allowed year-round cultivation. Agricultural scheduling was intimately tied to astronomy and the solar calendar. The Maya tracked the solar year through observatories aligned with the zenithal sun, ensuring precise timing for planting and harvest. Iconographic evidence from codices and stelae illustrates priests and astronomers observing the horizon to determine solstices and equinoxes. This synthesis of environmental knowledge and ritual practice transformed agriculture into a sacred act, the renewal of cosmic order through the renewal of the earth. The correlation between E-group architectural complexes and solar events across sites such as Uxacton and Siebel reinforces this link. Temples themselves functioned as agricultural instruments, synchronizing human labor with celestial cycles. Paleoenvironmental research offers quantifiable insight into how these systems evolved. Core samples from Lake Salpeton, Patenxil, and Koba record fluctuations in pollen and charcoal, reflecting both agricultural intensity and forest management. Around 400 CE, maize pollen peaks coincide with increased charcoal residues, suggesting widespread land clearance and controlled burning. The Maya used fire strategically to clear fields and rejuvenate soil through ash fertilization, a process known as swidden or milpa agriculture. However, the persistence of arboreal pollen in most cores indicates that complete deforestation was rare. Rather, the landscape was managed as a productive mosaic of cultivation, fallow, and forest regeneration. The scale of Maya agriculture required not only environmental skill but also organized labor. Excavations at settlement peripheries reveal clusters of field houses and tool workshops, indicating that agricultural production was both household-based and coordinated by urban centers. Ceramic griddles, obsidian blades, and stone hoes found at these sites attest to intensive food processing and maintenance of agricultural tools. The distribution of granaries and storage facilities within cities, such as Köpen and Karakol, implies systems of collection and redistribution, mechanisms by which elites could manage surplus and sustain large workforces during building projects or ceremonial events. Agricultural innovation extended beyond staple crops into the management of luxury and ritual goods. Cacao, cultivated in shaded groves along riverine floodplains, became a key economic and symbolic commodity. Residue analysis of vessels from Rio Azul and Colha confirms that cacao was consumed as a fermented beverage, often flavored with chili or maize. Similarly, cotton cultivation supported the production of fine textiles, an essential marker of elite status. The management of both subsistence and prestige crops reflects a dual economy, one grounded in daily sustenance, the other in ceremonial exchange and tribute. Analytically, these systems illustrate the principle of environmental adaptation through social complexity. The Maya did not rely on a single agricultural model but employed a regionally specific toolkit that balanced human demand with ecological constraints. Highland terraces minimized erosion in volcanic soils. Lowland raised fields countered flooding. Canal systems captured seasonal rains. This flexibility allowed urban centers to thrive even in the absence of major rivers, a feature that distinguished the Maya from other ancient civilizations. Archaeologists often describe this as a water-managed landscape, one that combined technical engineering with cosmological meaning. Every reservoir, terrace, and canal mirrored the ordered universe envisioned by Maya religion. Despite the ingenuity of these systems, environmental stress periodically challenged their stability. Pollen and sediment data from the Terminal Classic period, ca. 800 to 950 CE, show evidence of declining forest cover and increased soil erosion, coinciding with drought episodes recorded in speleothem isotope analyses from Belize and Yucatán. These findings suggest that intensive agriculture, while sustainable for centuries, ultimately reached ecological limits under population pressure and climatic fluctuation. Nevertheless, for over a millennium, the Maya succeeded in maintaining high population densities through a sophisticated understanding of their natural world. By combining hydrology, astronomy, and social coordination, the Maya achieved a level of agricultural mastery unmatched in the pre-Columbian Americas. Their landscape, terraced hillsides, drained swamps, and sacred reservoirs was both a technological achievement and a reflection of their worldview. A civilization sustained by its capacity to harmonize with the rhythms of nature. As food surpluses grew, so too did social hierarchies. Within every city's walls, a hierarchy mirrored the cosmos, from kings to farmers. Maya urban society was a carefully ordered structure in which status, labor, and belief were interwoven into every facet of daily life. Each city-state functioned as both a political and cosmological model, its architecture and institutions reflecting a stratified social order sustained by religion and administration. Archaeological, epigraphic, and bioarchaeological evidence reveals that this hierarchy was not abstract. It was built into the very stones of the cities and the bones of their inhabitants. At the apex stood the Ajah, or ruler, regarded as the divine intermediary between the human and supernatural realms. His palace served as the administrative and ceremonial heart of the city, often adjoining temples, ball courts, and plazas. Inscriptions describe rulers performing bloodletting rituals, conducting calendrical ceremonies, and receiving tribute, duties that affirmed both spiritual authority and political control. The royal court, composed of nobles, scribes, and priests, functioned as a bureaucratic apparatus overseeing tribute, diplomacy, and ritual scheduling. Architectural complexes such as the Palace of Palenque or the Acropolis of Copan illustrate this concentration of authority. Multi-story residential and administrative buildings organized around courtyards where audiences, feasts, and council meetings occurred. Below the royal household, the nobility, Sahil or Anab, formed the backbone of Maya governance. They managed provincial estates, commanded military units, and sponsored artisans. Excavations at Copan, Tikal, and Caracol reveal elite residences with plastered floors, stucco facades, and fine ceramic assemblages, material indicators of status and wealth. Many contained carved altars and ancestor shrines, suggesting that lineage veneration reinforced claims to land and privilege. Tombs such as Burial 116 at Tikal, containing jade ornaments, marine shell, and obsidian blades, demonstrate the hereditary nature of elite power. The association between mortuary elaboration and social rank is further corroborated by isotopic studies, showing differential diets. Elites consumed higher proportions of maize and animal protein, while commoners relied more heavily on root crops and legumes. Artisans and craft specialists occupied a distinct social tier within this structure. Workshops for obsidian blade production, shell ornament carving, and ceramic decoration have been found in urban peripheries and palace compounds, indicating both independent and state-controlled production. Specialists likely worked under noble patronage, creating goods for ritual use and long-distance exchange. Glyphic texts occasionally identify named artisans, painters, sculptors, or scribes, implying recognized status within courtly society. The presence of hieroglyphic codices and painted ceramics demonstrates a high degree of literacy and artistic sophistication among these professional classes, though their social mobility remained constrained by hereditary rank. Beneath the elite and artisan strata were the commoners, who formed the majority of the population. Most were agriculturalists, living in extended family compounds surrounding the urban core. Excavations at Caracol, Copan Valley, and Cuello have uncovered clusters of perishable dwellings, wattle and daub structures arranged around small courtyards, associated with grinding stones, storage pits, and hearths. These domestic spaces reveal subsistence patterns centered on milpa agriculture, complemented by small-scale horticulture and hunting. Commoners paid tribute in kind, maize, textiles, or labor, which supported public works and elite consumption. While materially modest, household organization and artifact diversity indicate economic autonomy and communal identity within neighborhoods. The lowest stratum comprised servants and slaves, a category that included both debt laborers and war captives. Inscriptions and murals portray bound captives used in ritual sacrifice or incorporated into elite households as attendants. Some were integrated into urban economies as laborers or concubines. Osteological analysis of burial contexts in Copan's Acropolis and Chichen Itza's sacred cenote shows trauma consistent with ritual execution, corroborating epigraphic references to captive sacrifice as a political display. Yet slavery among the Maya was not purely exploitative. In some cases, captives were adopted or manumitted, suggesting a flexible social boundary maintained through ritual legitimacy rather than legal codification. Urban design itself embodied this social stratification. Cities were organized along both symbolic and practical lines. Ceremonial precincts at the core, administrative and elite residences nearby, and commoner compounds radiating outward. The central plaza functioned as the social nexus, a stage for processions, markets, and festivals. Around it rose pyramids and temples that physically elevated rulers and gods above the populace. Processional causeways, sakbiab, linked these centers to suburban districts, reinforcing social and administrative integration. The spatial hierarchy thus mirrored cosmological order. The ruler at the center as axis mundi, surrounded by his court, subjects, and the broader landscape. Burial practices offer further insight into Maya social organization. High-status tombs were elaborately constructed with vaulted chambers and grave goods, while commoners were interred beneath household floors with modest offerings. The contrast between jade-inlaid masks of royalty and simple ceramic vessels of farmers illustrates a deeply ingrained system of inequality. Yet both categories shared a belief in ancestor veneration and cyclical rebirth, indicating that social hierarchy coexisted with cultural unity. Bioarchaeological studies reveal not only status-based dietary differences but also kinship clustering within neighborhoods, suggesting that urban society functioned through extended familial networks rather than anonymous mass populations. Analytically, the Maya city was both a political capital and a living organism, sustained by a hierarchy that channeled resources upward and ideology downward. Elite authority rested on control of agricultural surplus, access to exotic goods, and the orchestration of ritual spectacle. Commoners, in turn, found social cohesion through community labor, lineage identity, and participation in public ceremonies that reaffirmed cosmic balance. This reciprocal framework maintained stability in a world where divine kingship and subsistence agriculture were inseparable components of the same system. By the late Classic period, this structure had become increasingly formalized. Administrative titles multiplied, noble estates expanded, and monumental inscriptions proliferated, each a testament to the bureaucratic and ideological complexity of urban life. The Maya city was thus a microcosm of the universe it sought to emulate, ordered, hierarchical, and perpetually renewing its balance through the interplay of labor, ritual, and authority. To maintain order and connection, the Maya relied on trade routes and economic integration. Every city thrived on exchange, the pulse of the Maya economy. Commerce was the lifeblood that connected the scattered kingdoms of the Maya world. Beneath the towering pyramids and hieroglyphic stelae, daily exchange sustained both commoner households and royal courts. From the salt flats of Yucatán to the volcanic highlands of Guatemala, a network of markets and merchants tied together a civilization spread across dense forests, arid plains, and coastal lagoons. The classic Maya economy was neither primitive nor isolated. It was a sophisticated web of interdependence in which trade, craft production, and ritual exchange were inseparable. At the core of this system were the urban markets, vibrant spaces where goods, gossip, and political influence converged. Archaeological and ethno-historic evidence from sites like Calakmul, Caracol, and Tikal indicates that regular market plazas operated under royal supervision but served all social classes. Excavations at Caracol's epicentral market have revealed distinct commodity zones, marked by concentrations of obsidian blades, shell ornaments, ceramics, and food residues, spatial signatures of specialized exchange. Such findings confirm that the Maya economy was not exclusively redistributive through royal tribute, but also commercial, with market pricing likely governed by supply and demand. The Yaxmutal stele even reference tribute of cacao and tribute of salt, suggesting that rulers taxed market activities to fund public projects and rituals. Regional specialization underpinned this economic system. Stable isotope and compositional analyses of obsidian, ceramics, and marine shell reveal distinct production and trade spheres. Obsidian from El Chale and Ixtepic circulated throughout the southern lowlands, while Motagua Valley jadeite adorned nobles across the entire Maya region. Highlands supplied obsidian, basalt, and quetzal feathers. Lowlands provided salt, cacao, and exotic fauna. The Belize River Valley and Puerto Escondido served as vital transit zones, moving goods between coastal and inland centers. Over time, this circulation fostered a dense lattice of interregional routes, rivers, causeways, and sea lanes that united the Maya in economic and cultural exchange. Craft production was both domestic and institutional. In urban centers like Tikal and Palenque, specialized workshops produced items for both local consumption and elite patronage. Jade carvers, shell inlayers, and ceramic painters operated as semi-autonomous guilds or household collectives, often located near palatial compounds. Workshops unearthed at Aguatica, abandoned mid-production after an attack, showed distinct working spaces, tools, and unfinished goods, providing a rare snapshot of artisanship in progress. These artisans did not merely create objects of beauty. They manufactured symbols of status and cosmic order. Polychrome vessels, for example, often bore hieroglyphs naming the patron or artist, transforming economic transactions into acts of cultural expression. The commodities themselves reflected both utility and prestige. Everyday goods, maize, beans, salt, and cotton, sustained urban populations and regional trade. Salt, mined at coastal sites like Paynes Creek, was essential not only for diet but for food preservation, forming one of the most heavily traded staples. In contrast, luxury goods like jade, marine shell, stingray spines, and obsidian blades circulated within elite exchange networks, reinforcing alliances between dynasties. Cacao occupied a unique position, both a ritual beverage and a form of currency. Residues from Rio Azul vessels confirm cacao's dual role as sustenance and symbol, consumed in feasts, offered to gods, and used in tribute payments. The integration of market and ritual blurred economic boundaries. Exchange was not purely transactional. It was infused with cosmological significance. Market plazas were often located near temples, suggesting that trade operated under divine sanction. Goods like jade and cacao carried spiritual as well as material value, representing fertility, life force, and divine abundance. Ceremonial offerings of goods, especially during planting or harvest festivals, reinforced the sacred reciprocity between human labor and the gods' favor. Thus, the Maya economy functioned as both a pragmatic and metaphysical system, binding community and cosmos through exchange. Evidence also points to institutional oversight and taxation. Hieroglyphic texts record royal decrees and tribute lists, implying economic administration by noble officials. The Ajkuhun, stewards, and Atzib, scribes, likely managed inventories, tribute deliveries, and market regulation. Tribute was not always coercive. It also functioned as a symbol of allegiance between lesser lords and hegemonic powers like Calakmul or Tikal. Through this tributary framework, political and economic networks overlapped. Trade routes doubled as diplomatic arteries, carrying emissaries, marriage alliances, and religious knowledge. The Maya economy was therefore multiscalar. Domestic production for local use, market exchange for interregional flow, and tribute redistribution for political consolidation. Each level supported the others, creating resilience in the face of environmental or political disruption. Yet this complexity also bred inequality. As elites monopolized luxury trade and labor, commoners remained tethered to the cycles of production that sustained the system. In the end, the wealth and connectivity of the classic Maya world were both its strength and its vulnerability. Prosperity financed monumental art and science, but it also intensified competition among rival cities, seeking to control trade corridors and tribute flows. The same causeways that carried jade and cacao would soon bear armies and captives, as the pursuit of abundance gave way to the politics of domination. But as prosperity peaked, ambitions turned outward to warfare and science. By the 7th century, conflict had become both ritual and necessity, the politics of empire carved in battle. Between the 6th and 8th centuries CE, warfare became a defining institution of classic Maya civilization. What had once been limited, ritualized combat between neighboring lords evolved into sustained military campaigns aimed at territorial expansion, control of trade routes, and subjugation of rival dynasties. Hieroglyphic texts, architectural fortifications, and mass burials all attest to a world increasingly shaped by conflict. A transformation that redefined the political and cultural landscape of the Maya lowlands. The earliest depictions of warfare reveal a complex interplay of ritual and realpolitik. At Yaxchilan, lintel reliefs show King Itzamnij-Balam II brandishing captives before the gods, while inscriptions at Dos Pilas describe campaigns waged to enforce dynastic legitimacy. These scenes were not mere propaganda. They record tangible shifts in military organization. Captives were often displayed publicly or sacrificed in ceremonial events, reinforcing the divine authority of the victor. Archaeological evidence of trophy heads, bound prisoners, and ritualized bloodletting confirms that warfare had become central to elite ideology, a necessary theater of both piety and power. By the late Classic period, military architecture proliferated across the Maya world. The fortified site of Buchanan Campeche, surrounded by a deep moat and defensive walls, exemplifies the emerging concern for security. Similar fortifications at Aguatica and Punta de Chimino demonstrate that warfare was no longer confined to seasonal raids. Cities now prepared for prolonged sieges. Excavations at Aguatica reveal burned palatial structures and hastily abandoned artifacts, suggesting a sudden military assault that brought the site to an abrupt end. The construction of elevated citadels, ramparts, and strategic lookout points across the Patexbatan region illustrates a new defensive mentality, reflecting both regional instability and the growing strategic sophistication of Maya polities. Weapons and tactics evolved accordingly. The Maya adopted obsidian-tipped spears, darts, and atlotls, spear throwers, increasing their reach and lethality. Ceramic figurines and mural depictions from Bonampak and Chichen Itza show warriors clad in padded cotton armor, carrying shields and feathered headdresses that denoted rank and lineage. The shift from small-scale ritual combat to organized warfare required logistical coordination, provisioning troops, maintaining communication, and managing captured territories. Evidence from hieroglyphic stairways and stele suggests that military officers held formal titles such as Aj Keuhunajaw, Warrior Lord, or Batab, Regional Commander, indicating a hierarchical chain of command within military operations. The causes of this militarization were multifaceted. Population growth placed pressure on limited arable land, while the control of trade routes and tribute networks offered both economic incentive and political leverage. The Tikal-Calakmul rivalry exemplified these dynamics. Each sought to dominate the central lowlands through military alliances, diplomatic marriages, and proxy wars. The capture of rival kings, often depicted in epigraphic texts, symbolized both divine victory and territorial acquisition. Dos Pilas, a vassal of Calakmul, became a militarized frontier, its rulers legitimizing their authority through conquest. Archaeologists have identified sequences of wars, alliances, and retaliations that span generations, suggesting a system of interstate competition comparable in complexity to the city-states of classical Greece or Mesopotamia. Material evidence corroborates the textual record. Mass graves uncovered at Cancuin and Colha reveal signs of violent death and battlefield execution. Projectile points, obsidian blades, and trauma patterns on skeletal remains confirm the intensity of conflict. Yet even amid the violence, warfare retained a ritual dimension. Captives were paraded before stelae, their fates entwined with the cosmic cycles that governed kingship. Victories were commemorated in hieroglyphic inscriptions that linked military triumphs to celestial events, particularly solar and Venus alignments, reinforcing the notion that war mirrored divine order. In this sense, warfare was both a political instrument and a sacred obligation, sanctioned by the gods of time and space. The consequences of militarization extended beyond the battlefield. Cities restructured their landscapes around defense and authority. Monumental plazas doubled as mustering grounds, causeways functioned as supply routes, and temples became stages for martial ceremonies. Tribute systems extracted resources from conquered territories, integrating peripheral communities into expanding state economies. Control of key production zones, obsidian workshops, salt flats, and cacao-growing regions became essential for sustaining elite power. Warfare thus facilitated both political consolidation and economic redistribution, reinforcing the interdependence of violence and governance in the classic world. Interpretively, the militarization of the Maya marks a transition from divine kingship to political pragmatism. In earlier centuries, legitimacy rested primarily on sacred ancestry and ritual performance. By the late classic period, it depended increasingly on demonstrable conquest and the capacity to command armies. Epigraphic patterns show an escalation in martial titles and verb glyphs denoting to capture and to subjugate, reflecting a cultural valorization of martial prowess. This shift parallels developments in other contemporary civilizations, a move toward military legitimization as populations and polities grew more complex. By the close of the 8th century, warfare had become both symptom and catalyst of broader transformation. The very networks that once fostered exchange and cooperation were now fractured by conflict. Cities rose and fell in rapid succession, their monumental inscriptions chronicling an age of glory shadowed by violence. The militarization of the Maya world, while strengthening individual dynasties, ultimately destabilized the interregional system upon which classic civilization depended. Amid the tension of conquest, the same rulers turned their gaze upward, toward the heavens that governed their fate. The Maya measured time not in years, but in cycles of stars and gods. Among the many achievements of classic Maya civilization, none reveal their intellectual sophistication more vividly than their mastery of astronomy and mathematics. Across the jungles and limestone plateaus of Mesoamerica, astronomer priests recorded the movements of celestial bodies with extraordinary precision, transforming the sky into a living chronicle of divine order. Their observations guided the rhythms of agriculture, ritual, and kingship, the very structure of Maya time and society. Archaeological and epigraphic evidence shows that the Maya developed an intricate astronomical system grounded in long-term observation. At Yucatán, architectural alignments reveal an early solar observatory. 3 small temples aligned with the sunrise on the solstices and equinoxes, forming one of the earliest known horizon-based instruments in the Americas. From these vantage points, priests tracked the solar year, predicting the onset of the rainy season essential for maize cultivation. Similarly, at Köppen, the eastern structure of Group E aligns precisely with sunrise positions marking the solar cycle, underscoring the integration of celestial observation with architectural design. Beyond the sun, the Maya devoted particular attention to Venus, whose brilliant cycles through the sky were associated with the deity Kukulkan, or Quetzalcoatl in central Mexican tradition. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving pre-Columbian books, contains a detailed Venus table recording 584 day cycles, used to predict the planet's appearances and conjunctions. These calculations match modern astronomical data to within a single day, demonstrating both empirical precision and long-term observational continuity. Venus was believed to influence warfare and political fortune. Inscriptions at Yaxchilan and Caracol correlate military campaigns with Venus's heliacal risings, suggesting that astronomical phenomena dictated the timing of human events. Mathematically, the Maya developed a vigesimal-based 20-number system, employing dots for units, bars for fives, and a shell symbol for zero, the earliest recorded use of zero in the Americas and among the earliest in world history. This conceptual breakthrough allowed the Maya to perform positional calculations with remarkable efficiency, enabling precise reckoning of long chronological intervals. The number system underpinned the long count calendar, which measured time continuously from a mythic creation date corresponding to August 11, 3114 BCE in the Gregorian calendar. This framework permitted the dating of historical events across centuries, transforming timekeeping into both a scientific and political instrument. The calendrical system itself was an interlocking matrix of temporal cycles. The 260-day Tsokin, sacred calendar, and the 365-day Hab, solar calendar, combined to form the 52-year calendar round, within which no date repeated. The long count extended beyond this framework, offering a linear chronology for dynastic history. Inscriptions from sites such as Palenque, Copan, and Quirigua record precise dates for coronations, battles, and rituals, often accompanied by astronomical data indicating the phase of the moon or the position of Venus. This integration of celestial and historical notation demonstrates that the Maya did not separate science from statecraft. Rather, they conceived both as manifestations of cosmic order. At Palenque, the Temple of the Cross group exemplifies the fusion of astronomy, architecture, and ideology. The layout aligns with solar events marking the passage of seasons, while hieroglyphic panels link these moments to the divine ancestry of King Kinich Jenob Pakal. His tomb within the Temple of the Inscriptions, meticulously dated to 683 CE, references celestial conjunctions that framed his reign as part of a divine chronology. Such correlations suggest that astronomical calculation was used not merely to mark time but to legitimize political authority through cosmic synchronization. Recent advances in archaeoastronomy and epigraphy have clarified the mathematical sophistication underlying these observations. The lunar series inscriptions on monuments at Copan and Palenque record lunar months and eclipse intervals, demonstrating that Maya astronomers had derived accurate approximations of the synodic lunar cycle, 29.530 days. By correlating lunar data with the long count, they could forecast eclipses and regulate ritual calendars accordingly. The precision of these records indicates a disciplined tradition of calculation spanning generations of priest scholars. Interpretively, the Maya mathematical system represents a rare convergence of symbolic abstraction and empirical logic. The zero, for example, was not only a positional placeholder but a philosophical concept expressing renewal and completion, integral to the cyclical worldview that pervaded Maya cosmology. The recursive cycles of creation and destruction in the Popol Vuh parallel the arithmetic structure of the calendar itself, illustrating how numerical reasoning became a vehicle for theological expression. In this sense, Maya mathematics operated at once as a practical tool and a sacred language, a framework through which the universe could be measured, ordered, and understood. The intellectual rigor of the Maya system is further demonstrated by its longevity and consistency. Over a span of more than 1,000 years, astronomical and calendrical conventions remain stable across distant regions, from the highlands of Guatemala to the Yucatán Peninsula. Hieroglyphic notations for time and number exhibit a uniformity suggesting shared education and intercity communication among priestly elites. This standardization reflects a networked scholarly culture comparable to the scribal schools of Mesopotamia or the astronomer priests of ancient Egypt. By aligning temples with celestial markers and recording time through mathematical precision, the Maya achieved a synthesis of science and spirituality unparalleled in the pre-Columbian world. Their calculations governed agriculture, architecture, and ritual, the essential cycles of life and power. Through observation and computation, They transformed the heavens into a mirror of society, ensuring that every ceremony and every act of governance occurred in harmony with the cosmos. These calculations shaped agriculture, ritual, and war, all synchronized to the cosmic order they so carefully charted. From the jungles of Petén to the Caribbean coast, commerce carried the pulse of an empire. As classic Maya polities consolidated power in the 6th and 7th centuries CE, trade became a primary mechanism for economic integration, political influence, and cultural cohesion. The expansion of commercial networks facilitated the movement of both essential resources and prestige goods, while also establishing channels for diplomatic exchange and ideological dissemination. Archaeological evidence indicates that Maya merchants, elite administrators, and regional rulers actively managed a pan-Maya economic system, connecting lowland cities with highland production zones and distant coastal regions. Maritime trade formed a critical component of this system. The Caribbean and Gulf coasts served as hubs for salt, marine shell, stingray spines, and other commodities valued for both consumption and ritual use. Ports such as Ekaret, Puerto Escondido, and Kuwaitan provided access to open water routes, allowing merchants to move goods along rivers, lagoons, and coastal currents. Ceramic distribution patterns confirm that vessels manufactured in the southern lowlands or Yucatán reached Veracruz and Honduras, indicating extensive interregional trade. Isotopic and petrographic analyses of pottery shards demonstrate distinct production origins, revealing that these goods traveled hundreds of kilometers through carefully maintained logistical networks. Inland routes, particularly the Sakbiab or raised causeways, connected urban centers and resource zones. Sites like Calakmul, Tikal, and Caracol were linked via these engineered highways, facilitating the movement of obsidian from Ixtepic and El Chale, jadeite from the Motagua Valley, and luxury items such as quetzal feathers and fine ceramics. The integration of these corridors into the urban landscape suggests that infrastructure development was both economic and political, allowing rulers to monitor trade, levy tribute, and maintain territorial cohesion. The causeways also reinforced ceremonial and social connectivity. They were processional paths during festivals, further merging commerce with ritual and governance. Merchant elites, often semi-autonomous, played a key role in the spread of Maya culture. These professional traders operated between cities, carrying not only commodities but also religious motifs, calendrical knowledge, and dynastic propaganda. Artifacts such as polychrome ceramics, carved jade, and decorated shell inlays reveal consistent iconography across distant sites, indicating that the transmission of artistic and ideological standards accompanied material trade. Merchants' knowledge of routes, seasonal conditions, and regional markets endowed them with influence that rivaled minor nobility. In some instances, their activities reinforced political alliances or mediated disputes between urban centers. The movement of luxury goods functioned as both economic incentive and social signaling. Jadeite pendants, intricately carved figurines, and marine shell adornments were integral to elite identity, distributed as gifts during diplomatic exchanges or offered in ritual contexts. Archaeological excavations at Copán, Quirigua, and Palenque show that such items were carefully curated and stored, indicating centralized control of high-value commodities. These artifacts were often incorporated into stelae, tombs, and ceremonial caches, embedding trade within the broader framework of state ideology and religious practice. Ceramic distribution offers additional evidence of networked exchange. Types such as codex-style polychrome and fine orange have been recovered far beyond their production centers, including in Veracruz, northern Honduras, and even northern Belize. This geographic spread demonstrates not only logistical capability but also cultural standardization. Shared ceramic forms, decorative motifs, and symbolic language facilitated interregional recognition and reinforced a cohesive Maya identity. Trade, in this sense, was as much a vehicle for cultural cohesion as for material profit. The consolidation of these economic and cultural networks produced a pan-Maya system characterized by standardized iconography, calendrical synchronization, and mutually intelligible hieroglyphic writing. Cities aligned their ceremonial calendars to coordinate festivals, market cycles, and political events, suggesting that trade networks also enabled temporal coordination across large distances. The circulation of codices, monumental inscriptions, and portable art objects allowed the diffusion of technical knowledge, ceremonial protocols, and historical memory, effectively linking material commerce with intellectual and spiritual exchange. Interpretively, this integration of trade and expansion illustrates the structural sophistication of classic Maya civilization. Economic networks were not passive byproducts of settlement density. They were actively engineered, regulated, and defended. Control of strategic routes, access to high-value resources, and the ability to integrate distant regions under a shared symbolic framework gave dominant centers like Tikal, Calakmul, and Copan a decisive advantage. The interdependence created through trade reinforced political hierarchies, supported military campaigns, and sustained monumental construction, the material expression of Maya authority. Moreover, these networks enabled resilience in the face of environmental or political stress. When drought or warfare disrupted local production, regional exchange could buffer shortages, maintaining urban populations and elite consumption. However, the same reliance on interconnected systems also created vulnerabilities. Disruption in one area could cascade across the network, contributing to systemic strain during the terminal Classic collapse. Nonetheless, at the height of the late Classic period, this combination of commerce, resource management, and cultural standardization exemplified the reach and sophistication of Maya civilization. By the late 7th century, the fusion of warfare, astronomy, and trade had established the conditions for the golden age of the Classic Maya. Cities were interconnected by economic corridors, fortified by military capability, and synchronized to celestial cycles. A civilization whose expansion was both physical and intellectual, material and symbolic. By the late 7th century, this fusion of war, science, and trade propelled the Maya world into its golden age. The 8th century marked the summit of Maya civilization, an age of power, learning, and monumental design. Between 700 and 800 CE, Classic Maya civilization reached its urban and political apex, exhibiting levels of architectural, administrative, and demographic complexity unmatched in the region's history. Major city-states such as Palenque, Copan, Tikal, and Calakmul realized highly organized urban layouts, sophisticated monumental construction, and integrated bureaucracies capable of coordinating religious, economic, and military activity. This period represents the culmination of centuries of social evolution, trade expansion, and dynastic consolidation. Population density during this era surged in core zones, with estimates exceeding 500 individuals per square kilometer in urban centers. Archaeological surveys using LiDAR technology have revealed dense settlement patterns in the Petén Basin, including peripheral residential clusters, causeways, and agricultural terraces. These networks facilitated the management of resources, transport of goods, and mobilization of labor for monumental construction. Hydraulic infrastructure, such as reservoirs and canals at Tikal and Karakol, supported sustained population growth and mitigated seasonal rainfall variability. These innovations indicate a level of environmental engineering that allowed urban centers to function as dense, productive, and interconnected hubs. Political integration was reinforced through dynastic alliances and diplomacy. Royal marriages created ties between competing city-states, while ceremonial calendars standardized religious observances across regions. Epigraphic inscriptions detail agreements between Tikal and Copan or Calakmul and Dos Pilas, highlighting an intricate web of loyalty, vassalage, and rivalry. These alliances were codified in monumental stele, often accompanied by depictions of rulers engaging in joint ceremonies or ritual bloodletting, which publicly affirmed shared political and spiritual obligations. Such integration suggests that governance extended beyond individual city-states, forming a lowland-wide socio-political network anchored in both ritual and lineage. Architectural innovation and urban planning exemplified this integration. Palaces, plazas, pyramids, and ball courts were organized according to cosmological and functional principles, creating coherent civic landscapes. At Palenque, the palace complex demonstrates axial alignment and modular design, combining administrative offices, ceremonial halls, and residential spaces. Similarly, Copan's Acropolis features terraces, temples, and tombs arranged to emphasize dynastic authority. These complexes were not isolated constructions but nodes within a broader urban and interurban system, connected via causeways, sakbiab, that facilitated movement of people, goods, and information. Monumental public spaces reinforced civic identity and provided stages for elite display and ritual performance. Cultural cohesion was further maintained through the calendrical and ritual system. Shared observances, including the 260-day Tsokin and the 365-day Hab, structured public ceremonies, market cycles, and agricultural scheduling. Inscriptions indicate that major calendar anniversaries, such as the completion of a Katun, 20-year period, were celebrated simultaneously across multiple centers, synchronizing civic life and consolidating a sense of Pan-Maya identity. Astronomical observations, particularly of Venus and the Sun, regulated ritual timing and reinforced the link between cosmic order and political legitimacy. By integrating these temporal frameworks, the classic Maya transformed abstract celestial cycles into practical instruments for governance and social cohesion. Economic infrastructure underpinned urban growth and political integration. Markets facilitated the flow of ceramics, jade, obsidian, cacao, and textiles, while specialized craft production supported elite consumption and ritual offerings. The interdependence of production and exchange reinforced the authority of ruling dynasties. Tribute systems ensured that peripheral regions contributed labor and goods, while urban elites coordinated redistribution and ceremonial presentation. Archaeological evidence from storage pits, workshops, and market plazas illustrates the scale and organization of these systems. Economically and socially, the urban apex of the classic period depended on the integration of agriculture, trade, and elite administration into a coherent framework. Interpretively, the Golden Age represents more than a peak in material culture. It is the product of cumulative systemic development. Centuries of settlement, agricultural innovation, trade expansion, and dynastic competition converged to produce densely populated, highly organized, and culturally integrated centers. The synchronization of political authority, religious ideology, and urban infrastructure illustrates the Maya capacity to manage complexity at multiple scales. The classic Maya did not achieve this peak by accident. It was the result of deliberate coordination between rulers, priest-scholars, artisans, and commoners across both local and regional spheres. Yet, this period of unprecedented achievement also exposed the system to stress. High population densities, reliance on intensive agriculture, and interdependent trade networks created vulnerability to environmental fluctuations, resource depletion, and social tension. The very mechanisms that facilitated growth, centralized authority, labor mobilization, and interregional exchange, would later magnify the effects of ecological and political pressures. Understanding the Golden Age in these terms provides insight into both the scale of Maya accomplishment and the systemic fragility inherent in complex societies. By the late 8th century, the classic Maya world was a landscape of dense cities, monumental art, codified ritual, and tightly integrated polities. The urban apex, political alliances, and calendrical synchronization of this period reflect the height of cultural and administrative sophistication, setting the stage for both extraordinary achievements and the challenges that would follow in subsequent centuries. Yet behind this splendor, ecological and social pressures began to mount. In every palace and temple, art became history, recorded in pigment, plaster, and bark paper. During the Golden Age of the classic Maya, roughly 700 to 800 CE, artistic and intellectual production reached a level of refinement that combined technical skill, cultural expression, and political function. Across the lowlands, sculptors, painters, and scribes produced works that documented dynastic history, codified ritual practice, and communicated ideological principles. Artistic media ranged from monumental stone and stucco reliefs to intricately painted ceramics and portable codices, creating a rich, interwoven record of Maya civilization. Sculpture and architectural reliefs were central to the expression of elite authority. Sites such as Copan, Yaxchilan, and Palenque feature stelae, altars, and lintels that depict rulers performing ritual acts, engaging in warfare, or presiding over ceremonies. Copan's stelae are particularly notable for their naturalistic representation of human form, including musculature, posture, and individualized facial features. In contrast, Yaxchilan's stucco reliefs emphasize stylized linearity and dynamic movement, illustrating mythic and historical narratives with dramatic effect. The variance in regional artistic styles reflects localized workshop traditions and cultural preferences, while maintaining adherence to shared iconographic conventions recognizable across the Maya lowlands. Painted ceramics offered another avenue for narrative and intellectual expression. Vessels often depict mythic cycles, including stories of the hero twins and other cosmological events later codified in texts such as the Popol Vuh. These painted vases were not merely decorative. They functioned as both ritual implements and historical records, displaying the confluence of religious ideology and elite patronage. The level of sophistication in pigment application, composition, and iconographic detail underscores the technical expertise of artisans who were trained within specialized workshops. Archaeometric studies confirm that pigments were derived from mineral and vegetal sources, carefully processed to ensure durability and vibrancy, suggesting a deep understanding of material properties alongside narrative content. Literacy and epigraphic culture expanded alongside visual art. The classic Maya script achieved its full functional capacity during this period, capable of recording genealogies, ritual calendars, political treaties, and astronomical data. Monumental inscriptions, including the stairway glyphs at Yaxchilan and the hieroglyphic stairway at Copan, demonstrate precise chronological recording, linking dynastic events to calendrical cycles and celestial phenomena. Scribes, or AJTZIB, were integral to the dissemination of knowledge and the legitimization of rulership, often collaborating with sculptors and painters to integrate text and image into coherent visual narratives. Literacy, though primarily restricted to the elite, transformed art into a medium of state ideology, communicating authority, divine sanction, and historical memory to both literate and semi-literate audiences. Codices, though rare due to the fragile nature of bark paper material, preserve the intellectual accomplishments of Maya scholar priests. The Dresden, Madrid, and Paris codices contain detailed astronomical tables, ritual instructions, and medical knowledge, illustrating the application of observation and calculation in both ceremonial and practical contexts. These texts demonstrate the Maya capacity to integrate mathematical precision with empirical observation, providing accurate predictions of Venus cycles, eclipses, and lunar phases, as well as instructions for ritual offerings, divination, and healing. The codices reveal that the Maya intellectual framework extended beyond political or religious spheres, encompassing systematic approaches to natural phenomena, human health, and timekeeping. Regional variation in intellectual and artistic culture reflects both local innovation and interregional exchange. While Copan emphasized detailed portraiture and localized dynastic storytelling, Palenque focused on the integration of temple architecture, stelae, and murals to convey a cosmological narrative. Tikal, by contrast, relied on monumental stelae and palace reliefs to assert authority across an extensive political network. Despite these differences, shared motifs such as the maize god, the hero twins, jaguar symbolism, and celestial imagery created a recognizable visual and intellectual vocabulary across city-states. This facilitated the dissemination of ideas and reinforced cohesion within the broader Maya world. Artistic production was closely tied to ritual and social function. Murals and carvings were not static displays. They marked public ceremonies, royal anniversaries, and calendrical observances. In Palenque, murals of dynastic events align with architectural features that track solar movements, demonstrating the convergence of art, astronomy, and political authority. Similarly, carved vases used in elite feasts reinforced ritual protocols and social hierarchies, ensuring that intellectual and artistic production served practical, ceremonial, and ideological purposes. Interpretively, the Golden Age represents a synthesis of aesthetic, intellectual, and administrative sophistication. The integration of visual art, epigraphy, and codices transformed the Maya city-state into a dynamic cultural system, where knowledge, symbolism, and power were inseparable. Art functioned as both documentation and instruction. It recorded events, codified religious practice, and validated the political order. The capacity for abstraction, narrative complexity, and technical precision attests to an advanced educational and workshop system, emphasizing apprenticeship, transmission of knowledge, and elite oversight. By the late 8th century, Maya intellectual and artistic culture had reached an apex where science, religion, and political legitimacy were inseparable. Palaces, temples, and codices formed a comprehensive network of communication, memory, and authority, reflecting a civilization at its most integrated and self-aware. These accomplishments, however, coexisted with increasing social and environmental pressures, which would later contribute to the vulnerabilities of the classic Maya urban system. Even as art celebrated stability, cracks were forming beneath the surface of the great cities. The land that had sustained the Maya for centuries began to turn against them. By the late 8th century CE, the dense urban networks and intensive agricultural systems that had supported the Maya Golden Age began to encounter significant environmental limitations. Palynological analyses from Lake Shashankanab and sediment cores across the Petén Basin reveal a pattern of deforestation, soil depletion, and erosion. Pollen records indicate extensive clearance of lowland forests to expand milpa fields, while sediment stratigraphy shows accelerated deposition rates consistent with soil loss. These studies demonstrate that the human footprint on the landscape had reached a critical threshold, where the expansion of agricultural land and urban settlements increasingly compromised ecological resilience. Maize cultivation, the foundation of Maya subsistence, placed particular stress on soil fertility. Intensive planting cycles on hillsides and terraces, combined with limited fallow periods, led to the depletion of essential nutrients. Archaeobotanical evidence from Tikal, Caracol, and Köppen indicates that crop rotation was limited, while reliance on monoculture increased vulnerability to climatic fluctuations. Variations in annual rainfall, reconstructed through speleothem analysis and lake-level records, suggest that even minor drought episodes could reduce yields, threatening urban populations that had grown dependent on high agricultural output. The timing of environmental stress coincides with broader sociopolitical strain. Between approximately 760 and 800 CE, paleoclimate proxies indicate a series of drought events that would have compounded pressure on water storage systems, including reservoirs, canals, and cisterns. Excavations at Tikal and Caracol show reduced maintenance of hydraulic infrastructure during this period, while hieroglyphic records indicate a decline in monument erection, signaling interruptions in elite-sponsored construction projects. Monumental activity, traditionally linked to dynastic legitimacy, appears to have slowed, suggesting that political authority was increasingly challenged by environmental constraints. Urban population density, already among the highest in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica, exacerbated resource competition. LiDAR surveys reveal that peripheral residential zones expanded into marginal lands, likely increasing soil erosion and reducing agricultural efficiency. The concentration of labor and settlement in urban cores also intensified demand for wood, water, and other locally sourced materials. Palynological data demonstrate declines in arboreal pollen alongside increases in ruderal and disturbance-tolerant species, reflecting widespread deforestation and habitat modification. These ecological changes would have amplified social stress by constraining the resources available for both subsistence and ritual obligations. Competition among city-states became more acute as environmental pressures mounted. Archaeological evidence from Petexbatán and Rio Azul indicates heightened interpolity conflict during this period, including fortification of settlements, defensive architecture, and escalated warfare. The combination of limited resources and political rivalry intensified tensions over control of fertile land, water access, and trade routes. Captive burials and epigraphic accounts of military campaigns suggest that resource scarcity may have contributed directly to the scale and frequency of conflict, highlighting the intersection of ecological and political vulnerability. Interpretive analysis suggests that environmental stress did not act in isolation but interacted with social and demographic factors. High population densities, reliance on intensive maize agriculture, and the maintenance of dense urban hierarchies created a system highly sensitive to climatic variability. Drought episodes, soil degradation, and deforestation amplified existing social pressures, undermining the mechanisms that had sustained the Golden Age. This systemic interaction demonstrates the feedback loops between environment and society, where ecological limits constrained political and economic stability. Additionally, evidence points to adaptive strategies that were insufficient to mitigate stress. Agricultural terraces, raised fields, and water reservoirs initially provided resilience, but maintenance demands increased as population grew and drought intensified. Faunal and botanical remains indicate attempts to diversify food sources, including reliance on wild plants, small game, and aquatic resources. Yet these adaptations were insufficient to offset the combined pressures of ecological degradation and demographic expansion, revealing the limits of classic Maya technological ingenuity under extreme environmental strain. By the end of the 8th century, the convergence of these factors signaled the onset of a systemic crisis. Urban centers faced declining agricultural productivity, reduced resource availability, and increased social competition. Elite authority, previously reinforced through monumental construction and ceremonial spectacle, became increasingly tenuous. Monumental inscriptions and epigraphic gaps during this period reflect both reduced state capacity and the growing instability of intercity relations. Environmental stress, therefore, was not a singular cause but a catalyst that amplified existing vulnerabilities in the classic Maya system. Deforestation, soil erosion, and water scarcity undermined food security, while intensified competition over remaining resources heightened political instability. These pressures, when combined with social and demographic factors, set the stage for the regional upheavals that would define the terminal Classic period. These pressures converged into a period of upheaval, the late Classic crisis. The once harmonious web of Maya kingdoms began to unravel in blood and fire. Following 800 CE, the classic Maya world entered a period of profound political fragmentation. Previously stable alliances between city-states dissolved, leading to intensified warfare and localized conflict. Epigraphic evidence, including stele and lintel inscriptions, records the abrupt termination of dynasties, shortened reigns of rulers, and the disappearance of entire royal lineages. For example, at Dos Pilas, the collapse of the ruling dynasty coincides with repeated military campaigns recorded in hieroglyphic stairways, highlighting the lethal combination of internal rebellion and external assault. Similarly, Aguatica reveals evidence of sudden evacuation and destruction, including unfinished defensive walls and abandoned royal compounds, indicative of rapidly escalating urban conflict. The scale and frequency of warfare increased substantially during this period. Cities invested heavily in fortifications and defensive architecture, including concentric walls, palisades, and moats, particularly in the Patexbatan region. Archaeological excavations demonstrate that these defenses were constructed hastily but systematically, reflecting a strategic response to sustained military pressure. Human remains from these sites exhibit trauma consistent with intercity combat, confirming that conflict was both pervasive and violent. Elites and commoners alike were drawn into warfare, with captives often incorporated into ritualized displays of dominance, further illustrating the intersection of military and ceremonial life. Civil conflict disrupted traditional mechanisms of political legitimacy. Monument construction and artistic production, previously central to demonstrating dynastic authority, declined sharply. In many urban centers, stele inscriptions ceased, mural painting diminished, and architectural projects were abandoned or left incomplete. This reduction in state-sponsored artistry reflects a reallocation of labor and resources toward survival and defense, signaling the erosion of centralized governance. Furthermore, administrative records suggest that once cohesive bureaucracies fragmented, leaving smaller, more localized authorities in control of residual territory. Political instability was compounded by intercity competition for resources, particularly as environmental pressures intensified. Droughts, soil degradation, and deforestation limited agricultural output, forcing rulers to assert control over remaining fertile areas and trade routes. Hieroglyphic accounts indicate frequent conflicts over such resources, with cities like Naranjo, Caracol, and Piedras Negras repeatedly engaged in campaigns to secure agricultural land, water access, and elite prestige goods. This competition exacerbated the collapse of long-standing alliances and undermined the stability of the broader lowland network. Epigraphic and archaeological evidence points to socio-political fragmentation at multiple scales. Some sites retained partial governance structures, often dominated by military elites, while others were abandoned entirely. The rapidity of collapse varied regionally. In the southern lowlands, urban depopulation and site abandonment occurred within decades, whereas northern Yucatán centers like Chichen Itza persisted longer, highlighting the uneven nature of the crisis. Nonetheless, the overarching trend reflects a breakdown in hierarchical coordination, weakened royal authority, and increased intercity hostility. Interpretively, the late Classic crisis illustrates the vulnerability of complex, interdependent systems. The centralized authority of the Classic Maya relied on coordinated administration, agricultural surplus, trade networks, and ideological legitimacy. Once these mechanisms were disrupted by warfare, resource scarcity, and environmental stress, the political structure could no longer sustain itself. Fragmentation was both a symptom and a driver of collapse. As rulers fell, civic structures deteriorated, which in turn intensified competition, insecurity, and urban decline. Additionally, the decline in artistic and architectural production provides insight into shifting societal priorities. The cessation of elaborate stelae and murals suggests that symbolic power no longer reinforced political authority effectively, as survival and defense became paramount. Workshops that had produced fine ceramics, carved stone monuments, and murals either ceased operation or redirected efforts toward utilitarian construction. This shift underscores the systemic nature of the crisis. Cultural expression, economy, and governance were tightly linked, and the disruption of one domain precipitated stress across the entire societal structure. The late Classic period also demonstrates the interaction between political and environmental factors. Warfare was intensified by resource scarcity, while the fragmentation of city-states limited collective capacity to respond to droughts and agricultural stress. Cities became increasingly isolated, defensive, and competitive, weakening regional cooperation that had previously stabilized trade, irrigation, and ceremonial networks. In this context, political fragmentation and environmental stress reinforced one another, creating a feedback loop that accelerated societal decline. By the early 9th century, the once dense network of classic Maya polities had entered a period of irreversible destabilization. Dynastic authority faltered, urban fortifications failed to ensure security, and intercity conflict became endemic. The combination of civil war, resource competition, and social upheaval set the stage for widespread abandonment of major southern lowland centers, marking the effective end of the classic political system in these regions. As kings fell, cities faltered, and the environment delivered its final blow. Year by year, the rains failed, and with them an entire civilization's lifeblood. Between approximately 820 and 870 CE, the southern Maya lowlands experienced prolonged and severe droughts, according to speleothem isotope records from Belize, Yucatán, and the Petén Basin. Variations in oxygen and carbon isotopes preserved in cave formations indicate extended periods of reduced precipitation, often spanning multiple decades. These climatic disruptions directly affected agricultural productivity, undermining maize cultivation, terrace irrigation, and raised field systems that had supported dense urban populations for centuries. The environmental stress compounded the social and political instability already induced by intercity warfare, dynastic fragmentation, and resource competition. Archaeological evidence demonstrates the rapid consequences of agricultural collapse. Excavations at Tikal, Copan, and Caracol reveal incomplete temple constructions, abandoned palaces, and signs of hasty departures, such as unburied human remains and the sudden cessation of civic and ritual activity. LiDAR surveys indicate that peripheral settlements were evacuated first, with urban cores maintaining residual populations only temporarily. The abandonment of ceremonial centers and infrastructure reflects a breakdown not only in food security, but also in the social and religious systems that had legitimized rulership and maintained cohesion. Famine would have directly affected population density and mortality rates. While quantitative data are limited, evidence from skeletal remains shows increased signs of malnutrition, such as enamel hypoplasia and bone lesions, consistent with prolonged dietary stress. Combined with social disruption from warfare, famine created conditions in which communities could no longer sustain themselves in historically populous regions. The archaeological record suggests migration as a primary response, with populations relocating toward areas with more stable water supplies and productive land, particularly in the northern Yucatán and coastal lowlands. The pace of urban abandonment was unusually rapid for a civilization of this scale. Excavations at Dos Pilas, Piedras Negras, and Quirigua reveal abrupt discontinuities in building activity, with ceremonial projects halted mid-construction and domestic compounds left intact but unoccupied. These patterns indicate forced or voluntary evacuation, rather than gradual demographic decline. The abruptness reflects the combined impact of environmental failure and political collapse, demonstrating the interdependence of ecological stability and societal organization in sustaining urban centers. The northern lowlands and coastal regions, by contrast, provided relative environmental stability. Areas such as Chichen Itza and Uxmal benefited from more reliable rainfall patterns, cenote access, and diversified subsistence strategies. Archaeological surveys show evidence of population influx, new construction projects, and the consolidation of emergent political authorities in these northern centers. This demographic shift illustrates resilience and adaptation, as displaced populations established new economic and political networks in regions less vulnerable to drought stress. Interpretively, the events of 820 to 870 CE highlight the critical role of climate as a driver of societal change. While warfare, political fragmentation, and resource competition weakened southern Maya states, it was the prolonged failure of precipitation that delivered the decisive blow, undermining agricultural output and destabilizing urban life. Speleothem records correlate closely with the archaeological timeline, confirming that environmental forces were not incidental but central to the collapse. This period underscores how climate variability can amplify pre-existing vulnerabilities in complex socio-political systems. The evidence also illuminates the mechanisms of societal collapse and migration. Southern lowland centers did not disappear simultaneously. Rather, abandonment followed a pattern dictated by environmental stress gradients and proximity to water and arable land. Peripheral settlements were vacated first, while core ceremonial districts persisted temporarily until food and water scarcity made continued occupation untenable. Migration was not uniform. Social networks, elite decision-making, and economic opportunities in northern regions shaped patterns of resettlement. In effect, the collapse of the southern lowlands triggered a northward reorganization of Maya political and cultural life. By the end of the 9th century, the formerly dense network of southern Maya cities was largely depopulated. Temple pyramids stood incomplete or in ruin, palaces were deserted, and steles ceased to be carved. This sudden demographic and infrastructural vacuum marked the culmination of the late Classic crisis in the South, representing both the limits of environmental adaptation and the fragility of interdependent urban systems. As the southern cities fell silent, new centers emerged to the north, reshaping Maya civilization. The Maya world did not end, it transformed. While the southern lowlands experienced widespread urban abandonment, not all Maya communities vanished. Smaller polities and rural settlements persisted, often in areas less affected by drought or political conflict. Archaeological surveys indicate that many of these communities continued ritual practices, maintained local governance, and preserved elite lineages on a reduced scale. Ceremonial plazas remained active, minor stelae and altars were erected, and household compounds show continued occupation, reflecting the endurance of social and cultural structures even in the face of systemic collapse. These surviving communities maintained calendrical and religious traditions, preserving knowledge critical to societal continuity. Ritual cycles tied to the Tzolk'in and Hob calendars persisted, and astronomical observation continued at smaller scales, enabling communities to align agricultural and ceremonial activities with seasonal and celestial patterns. This continuity ensured that fundamental elements of Maya intellectual culture, including timekeeping, ritual observance, and dynastic memory, survived the crisis and were transmitted to subsequent generations. Evidence from northern and peripheral regions further demonstrates cultural persistence. Sites in the northern Yucatán, such as Chichen Itza and Uxmal, absorbed populations migrating from the south. These centers maintained complex governance structures, ceremonial life, and artistic production, integrating southern traditions with local innovations. Material culture, including pottery styles, architectural motifs, and iconography, shows continuity from the classic into the post-classic period, underscoring the adaptive resilience of Maya society. Interpretively, the late classic collapse should not be viewed solely as an endpoint. Rather, it represents a transformation of political and urban structures, wherein large polities fragmented but essential cultural practices endured. These surviving communities became the custodians of knowledge, ritual, and technology that would underpin post-classic development. The ability of these groups to maintain continuity demonstrates the capacity for resilience within complex societies, even amid widespread structural failure. By preserving traditions of writing, astronomy, ritual, and governance, these smaller polities ensured that the Maya cultural framework remained intact. Although political dominance shifted and monumental construction declined, the intellectual and ritual core of Maya civilization continued, enabling a resurgence in new regions and under new political configurations in the centuries to follow. From these remnants, a new order arose, the post-classic Maya. Temples once alive with ceremony stood empty beneath encroaching vines. By approximately 900 CE, the southern Maya lowlands had experienced a near-total urban collapse. Major centers, including Copan, Tikal, and Palenque, were largely abandoned, leaving monumental complexes devoid of the populations that had constructed and sustained them for centuries. The cessation of dated hieroglyphic inscriptions, a key indicator in classic Maya chronology, marks the formal close of the Southern Classic period. Stele, altars, and palace murals abruptly stop recording dynastic events, signaling both the termination of elite authority and the broader breakdown of civic administration. Archaeological strata from these sites reveal evidence of halted construction, incomplete projects, and abandonment. Excavations at Tikal and Copan show unfinished temples, collapsed residential structures, and disused public plazas. Looting and secondary use of building materials in some cases suggest that survivors scavenged elite compounds for functional resources, further contributing to the dismantling of traditional urban frameworks. In many instances, household compounds in the periphery display gradual depopulation, with ceramic and faunal remains indicating a sharp decline in both domestic activity and ritual practice. Elite authority collapsed as political and economic structures disintegrated. Once dominant dynasties lost control over tributary networks and agricultural hinterlands, prompting dispersal of commoners into rural areas, satellite settlements, or marginal zones. This migration contributed to the fragmentation of social organization, as kinship networks and local governance became the primary mechanisms for maintaining community cohesion. Epigraphic and material evidence indicates that elite-sponsored monumental labor, ceremonial feasting, and codified ritual practice, previously central to legitimizing rulership, ceased entirely, reflecting the erosion of institutional frameworks. The abandonment of the southern lowlands was not uniform, but followed predictable environmental and logistical patterns. Cities dependent on hydraulic management, such as Tikal with its reservoir systems, suffered early disruptions when maintenance declined. Agricultural margins became increasingly unsustainable due to soil depletion, deforestation, and prolonged drought. Peripheral settlements often depopulated first, while urban cores persisted temporarily until diminishing water supply and social instability made continued occupation untenable. This pattern demonstrates the interplay between environmental stress and societal fragility, illustrating how ecological constraints compounded existing political weaknesses. The cultural impact of this collapse was profound. Artistic production and literacy experienced abrupt declines, as stele carving, mural painting, and hieroglyphic inscriptions ceased. Workshops that had produced ceramics, jade ornaments, and ritual paraphernalia were abandoned or repurposed, while elite ceremonial complexes fell into disuse. The symbolic and ideological framework that had legitimized rulership was effectively dismantled, leaving material culture as the primary record of a once vibrant urban civilization. Despite this systemic collapse, archaeological evidence shows that smaller settlements persisted in marginal areas, maintaining ritual practice and local governance. These communities preserved knowledge of calendars, astronomy, and religious ritual, forming a bridge between the classic and post-classic periods. While large-scale urbanism and dynastic authority disappeared, these surviving groups became custodians of Maya culture, ensuring that the intellectual and ceremonial traditions of the southern lowlands were not entirely lost. Interpretively, the end of the Classic South represents the culmination of a multifactorial decline. Environmental degradation, prolonged drought, population pressure, and political fragmentation all contributed to the unraveling of urban networks. Yet the archaeological record emphasizes that collapse was neither instantaneous nor total. Instead, it was a complex, regionally variable process, in which the disintegration of elite structures coincided with the survival of localized cultural and ritual practices. By the close of the 9th century, the southern lowlands were largely depopulated, temples and palaces stood abandoned, and civic authority had effectively vanished. The classic Maya era, defined by monumental construction, dynastic continuity, and regional integration, had drawn to an end. Yet in the north, a new phase of Maya civilization was beginning. The fall of the classic Maya remains one of archaeology's most studied enigmas. Scholars have long debated the causes of the southern classic Maya collapse, exploring a range of ecological, political, and social factors. Early models emphasized climatic stress, particularly prolonged droughts reconstructed from speleothem isotopes and lake sediment cores. These studies suggest that multi-decadal reductions in precipitation between 820 and 870 CE critically disrupted maize cultivation, strained water reservoirs, and limited food surpluses. The ecological argument emphasizes that environmental constraints amplified existing vulnerabilities within dense urban populations, triggering cascading failures in subsistence systems. Other theories highlight political and social dynamics. Evidence from inscriptions, fortifications, and residential abandonment points to intensified intercity warfare, elite competition, and the breakdown of centralized authority. Royal lineages ended abruptly, alliances dissolved, and cities fortified against neighboring rivals. Some scholars argue that over-centralization of political power made classic polities highly sensitive to both internal and external shocks, reducing resilience when elite authority faltered. The decline in monument construction and artistic production reflects a shift of resources from symbolic and ceremonial labor to survival and defense, underscoring the interdependence of governance, ritual, and economy. Economic factors are also significant. Trade disruption may have compounded the effects of drought and conflict, particularly for luxury goods such as jade, obsidian, and cacao, which were crucial for elite legitimacy and redistribution. Archaeometric studies demonstrate that networks connecting highland and lowland polities were extensive, yet fragile. The collapse of central authorities likely interrupted exchange, weakening both economic integration and social cohesion. The reduction in long-distance trade would have diminished access to materials necessary for ritual practice, construction, and elite display, further destabilizing political systems. Some interpretations incorporate the role of popular resistance or peasant revolt. The stress of intensified labor demands, tribute obligations, and food scarcity may have provoked social unrest, although direct evidence is limited. The hypothesis suggests that elite extraction could have contributed to depopulation and the abandonment of urban centers, particularly where centralized authority failed to enforce compliance. Burial patterns, settlement abandonment, and fortification evidence are occasionally cited in support, though scholars debate the magnitude and prevalence of such internal social conflict. Contemporary scholarship favors multi-causal syntheses, emphasizing the interaction of environmental, political, and economic pressures. Collapse is increasingly understood as a systemic failure within an interdependent network of urban centers, agricultural systems, and elite institutions. Environmental stress, political fragmentation, trade disruption, and demographic pressures functioned as mutually reinforcing factors, creating cascading vulnerabilities that ultimately undermined the classic Maya city-states. This perspective aligns with ecological models of complex societies, illustrating how feedback loops between human activity and environmental limits can precipitate sudden institutional and demographic change. Ongoing research continues to refine these theories. Paleoenvironmental data, including lake cores, speleothems, and pollen studies, provide increasingly precise chronologies of drought and land use change. Combined with archaeological evidence of fortifications, construction abandonment, and population shifts, these datasets enable scholars to correlate ecological events with social and political transformation. Furthermore, epigraphic analysis and settlement surveys offer insight into the variability of collapse across regions, demonstrating that some northern and peripheral communities persisted, adapted, or even thrived while the southern lowlands declined. Interpretively, the debate over the classic collapse underscores the importance of holistic, evidence-based approaches. No single factor fully accounts for the rapid abandonment of the southern lowlands. Rather, the event reflects the vulnerability of densely interconnected systems to compounded shocks. By integrating environmental, political, and economic lines of evidence, scholars are increasingly able to construct nuanced models that explain both regional variability and the timing of collapse. Ultimately, understanding the classic Maya decline provides broader insights into societal resilience and vulnerability. The interplay of human activity and environmental limits, the fragility of hierarchical political structures, and the consequences of resource dependency highlight the complex dynamics that can precipitate urban and civilizational failure. Archaeology, paleoecology, and epigraphy together continue to illuminate these processes, ensuring that the Maya collapse remains a paradigmatic case study in global historical research. From collapse emerged renewal, the post-classic reorganization of Maya society. In the dry plains of Yucatán, the Maya story entered its next chapter. As the southern lowlands emptied, populations migrated northward, settling in areas less vulnerable to drought and soil depletion. Cities such as Uxmal, Chichen Itza, and Mayapan benefited from more stable rainfall, cenote water sources, and arable land suitable for agriculture. These northern centers absorbed displaced populations, integrating knowledge, ritual practices, and technological skills from the classic heartlands. The influx of migrants facilitated the continuity of Maya cultural traditions despite the political collapse of the South. Trade and economic networks adapted to these new centers. Northern cities maintained exchange of obsidian, salt, shell, and luxury goods, connecting coastal and inland regions. Material culture demonstrates continuity with southern classic styles, including ceramics, architectural motifs, and iconography, though adapted to local conditions and northern political systems. These adaptations reflect both the resilience of Maya practices and the emergence of new political configurations that differed from the southern dynastic city-states. Religious and ceremonial life persisted. Northern centers continued the use of Maya calendars, astronomical observation, and ritual cycles, maintaining continuity in cosmological and agricultural knowledge. Architectural complexes, such as the pyramids of Uxmal and the ball courts of Chichen Itza, demonstrate the ongoing integration of ceremonial space with political authority. Artistic production also continued, blending classic traditions with northern innovations in stucco, stonework, and iconography. This period exemplifies cultural persistence amid systemic transformation. While southern urban hierarchies collapsed, Northern polities provided a framework in which Maya knowledge, ritual, and social organization could survive and evolve. The post-classic North became the locus for experimentation with new political models, including confederations of city-states, elite councils, and regional trade hubs, all while preserving core elements of classic Maya intellectual and religious systems. Interpretively, the northern lowlands illustrate the adaptive capacity of Maya civilization. Migration, environmental opportunity, and flexible political structures allowed cultural memory and technological expertise to persist through adversity, bridging the transition from the classic to post-classic periods. By maintaining calendars, ritual observances, and craft traditions, northern centers ensured that the intellectual and ceremonial foundations of Maya society endured despite the collapse of southern urban networks. These northern centers defined the post-classic transformation that followed. At Chichen Itza, new gods and new rulers forged a hybrid age. Between 900 and 1100 CE, Chichen Itza emerged as the preeminent political and economic center of the northern Yucatán. The city integrated classic Maya traditions with influences from central Mexico, particularly Toltec motifs, producing an architectural and artistic synthesis unique to the post-classic period. Structures such as the Temple of the Warriors and the El Castillo Pyramid exhibit feathered serpent iconography, columned halls, and expansive ball courts, reflecting both ceremonial innovation and political assertion. The city's monumental layout demonstrates centralized planning and the symbolic alignment of architecture with cosmological principles inherited from the classic era. Maritime and overland trade networks underpinned Chichen Itza's rise. Ports along the Caribbean and Gulf coasts facilitated the exchange of obsidian, jade, salt, cacao, and exotic shells. Archaeometric analyses of obsidian artifacts indicate connections to the highlands of Guatemala and central Mexico, confirming long-distance exchange that reinforced both economic power and diplomatic influence. Trade supported urban growth, enabled elite consolidation, and facilitated the importation of Toltec cultural elements, which were incorporated into local religious and political practices. Chichen Itza also institutionalized a hybrid political and ritual system. Inscriptions and architectural evidence suggest that authority was distributed across multiple elite lineages, integrating martial, religious, and civic functions. Ceremonial spaces, including the Great Ball Court and Temple of the Jaguars, reinforced social hierarchies and served as venues for public display of power, ritualized warfare, and calendrical ceremonies. This integration of political, religious, and architectural innovation exemplifies the adaptability of Maya governance in the northern post-classic context. Artistic production in Chichen Itza demonstrates continuity with classic Maya techniques while incorporating new stylistic elements. Stucco reliefs, carved columns, and monumental sculptures display motifs such as plumed serpents, jaguars, and warrior imagery, reflecting Toltec Maya syncretism. These visual markers communicated both cosmological knowledge and political authority, reinforcing Chichen Itza's dominance over surrounding city-states. Ceramics, lithic tools, and decorative artifacts similarly reveal an integration of northern and highland traditions, highlighting the city's role as a cultural as well as political hub. Interpretively, Chichen Itza represents a model of post-classic resilience and adaptation. The collapse of southern classic cities created opportunities for northern polities to consolidate populations, control trade routes, and integrate diverse cultural influences. Chichen Itza's success illustrates how Maya society preserved core traditions, calendrical systems, cosmological symbolism, and civic organization, while responding dynamically to new political realities and intercultural exchange. The city's hybrid architecture and iconography exemplify the negotiation between continuity and innovation, ensuring the survival of Maya identity in a transformed geographic and political landscape. By the late 11th century, Chichen Itza had established itself as the northern lowlands' dominant center. It projected influence over satellite communities, controlled regional trade, and functioned as a cultural bridge linking Maya traditions with external Mesoamerican innovations. Its rise underscores the capacity of Maya civilization to reorganize politically, economically, and culturally following the fragmentation and collapse of the classic southern lowlands. But as Chichen Itza's influence waned, a confederation rose to take its place. Mayapan stood as the last great experiment in Maya political unity. By approximately 1200 CE, the northern Maya lowlands had entered a new phase of political organization centered on Mayapan, which emerged as the leading city in a network of loosely allied city-states. Unlike the centralized authority of classic southern polities or Chichen Itza's hegemonic dominance, Mayapan coordinated governance through a confederation of nobles and priestly councils, as recorded in post-conquest codices and early colonial chronicles. Authority was distributed among regional elites, and leadership rotated periodically, reflecting a system designed to balance power, maintain trade networks, and preserve ceremonial cohesion across multiple urban centers. The Confederation emphasized economic integration and mercantile exchange. Coastal and inland trade facilitated the flow of jade, obsidian, salt, textiles, and cacao between northern Yucatán communities. Markets and port settlements supported specialized craft production, and Mayapan acted as a political and commercial hub. Material culture, including ceramics, stone carvings, and architectural motifs, demonstrates continuity with classic and Chichen Itza traditions, while also reflecting local adaptations that accommodated the more cooperative structure of this regional alliance. Religious and ceremonial life remained central to political legitimacy. Temples, ball courts, and plazas functioned as shared spaces for ritual performance, calendrical observances, and elite display. Codices and early colonial records indicate that priestly authorities played active roles in decision-making, regulating ceremonial timing, and mediating disputes among member city-states. These practices reinforced social cohesion and provided a framework for coordination, despite the absence of a single centralized monarchy. Internal tensions, however, were an ongoing challenge. The balance of power within the Confederation required careful negotiation, and evidence from settlement patterns, fortifications, and historical chronicles suggests that rivalries occasionally escalated into armed conflict. By the 15th century, these internal fractures, combined with environmental pressures and shifting trade patterns, contributed to the dissolution of the alliance. Mayapan itself was eventually abandoned following a series of internal conflicts, marking the end of large-scale regional political coordination in northern Yucatán prior to European contact. Interpretively, Mayapan illustrates the evolution of Maya political strategies in the post-classic era. Confronted with the collapse of southern centralized polities and the partial decline of Chichen Itza, northern elites experimented with cooperative governance structures. The Confederation model highlights the Maya capacity to adapt to demographic, environmental, and economic constraints while maintaining continuity in ritual, trade, and social hierarchy. It demonstrates that political innovation could coexist with inherited cultural traditions, creating a form of governance distinct from the dynastic centralization of the classic period. By combining rotational councils, trade networks, and ritual authority, Mayapan and its allied states preserved Maya identity and cohesion in a more flexible political framework. While smaller in scale than earlier empires, the Confederation effectively managed resources, maintained communication among dispersed communities, and sustained cultural practices that would endure into the late post-classic period. Fragmented but resilient, these states would confront a new external power from across the sea. From the ruins of empire, commerce kept the Maya world connected. In the post-classic period, the Maya expanded maritime trade networks along the Caribbean and Gulf coasts, ensuring economic cohesion despite political fragmentation. Ports such as Tulum, Cozumel, and Ecotret became hubs for the exchange of salt, cotton, obsidian, ceramics, and other commodities. Archaeological evidence, including harbor structures, imported goods, and isotopic analysis of traded materials, demonstrates the scale and organization of these coastal networks. Trade facilitated the movement of wealth, supported local and regional elites, and enabled cultural continuity by linking northern centers with southern traditions, highland resources, and Caribbean contacts. Coastal towns served not only as economic nodes but also as cultural conduits. Ceramics, Shell ornaments and architectural motifs carried stylistic elements from classic Maya centers, Chichen Itza, and Mayapan into port settlements. This continuity in material culture reflects the persistence of traditional craft, iconography, and ritual symbolism, despite shifts in political structure. Artifacts from these sites reveal adaptations to maritime commerce while retaining recognizable features of Maya identity, demonstrating how economic activity reinforced cultural cohesion. Ritual and calendrical systems remained central to post-classic society. Observations of solar, lunar, and Venus cycles continued to guide agriculture, religious ceremonies, and political decision-making. Hieroglyphic inscriptions, portable objects, and architectural alignments indicate that Maya timekeeping, language, and ceremonial practices persisted in both urban centers and coastal settlements. These elements ensured that the intellectual and spiritual frameworks of Maya civilization survived, even as large-scale urbanism and dynastic authority had largely vanished from the southern lowlands. The strategic integration of commerce and ritual enabled the post-classic Maya to maintain cohesion across dispersed communities. Coastal trade supported the distribution of luxury goods and ritual paraphernalia, facilitating both political legitimacy and social networks. This networked approach contrasts with the centralized hierarchies of the classic era, illustrating the Maya capacity to adapt governance, economy, and culture to new geographic and environmental realities. Interpretively, post-classic coastal trade demonstrates the resilience and continuity of Maya civilization. Despite the collapse of southern cities and the fragmentation of northern polities, economic interconnection and cultural memory ensured that the Maya world remained vibrant and adaptive. Material culture, ritual observance, and literacy persisted in decentralized forms, providing the structural and symbolic foundations that would endure until European contact in the 16th century. By combining maritime commerce with enduring cultural practices, post-classic Maya communities kept networks alive, sustained knowledge systems, and preserved identity. Coastal towns became both economic engines and cultural anchors, bridging the past of the classic era with the evolving realities of the northern lowlands. When European ships appeared on the horizon, they encountered a civilization still alive. The meeting of two worlds was neither swift nor silent. In the early 16th century, Spanish expeditions advanced into the Yucatán Peninsula and the Guatemalan highlands, encountering Maya communities that had maintained their social, political, and ritual systems for centuries. Initial contact was sporadic, and European chroniclers documented a mixture of diplomacy, negotiation, and armed resistance. Unlike the rapid conquests seen elsewhere in the Americas, Maya city-states displayed remarkable resilience, exploiting their knowledge of terrain, fortified settlements, and decentralized political structures to resist submission. Northern centers, including Chichen Itza, Mayapan, and coastal towns, faced pressure from Spanish incursions but often remained partially autonomous through strategic negotiation, tribute, and alliances. The Spanish relied on both military force and the manipulation of interpolity rivalries, yet even under these pressures, Maya communities preserved elements of governance, ritual practice, and social hierarchy. Chronicles describe prolonged guerrilla campaigns, fortified strongholds, and covert survival strategies, demonstrating a level of strategic sophistication that delayed full subjugation for decades. In the southern and Petén regions, resistance continued into the late 17th century. The Itza capital of Najpatán on Lake Petén Itza remained independent until 1697, representing the last bastion of classic Maya political authority. Spanish accounts detail the difficulty of penetrating fortified settlements, navigating lake systems, and negotiating with highly organized leadership. Archaeological surveys corroborate evidence of defensive constructions, temporary relocations, and continued ritual activity during periods of conflict. These findings illustrate that conquest was a prolonged process, marked by negotiation, intermittent warfare, and adaptation rather than immediate domination. Maya resistance was not solely militarized. It also involved cultural and social strategies. Communities adapted to Spanish-imposed religious and economic systems while maintaining traditional languages, calendar observances, and ceremonial practices in private or semi-public spheres. Codices, oral histories, and material culture indicate the persistence of ritual, artistic expression, and lineage memory, even under colonial constraints. This demonstrates a dual strategy of survival. Political subjugation coexisted with cultural continuity. Interpretively, the encounter between Maya polities and Spanish forces illustrates the resilience of decentralized, culturally cohesive societies facing external conquest. While European military technology and colonial organization ultimately imposed political control, the Maya leveraged environmental knowledge, social cohesion, and adaptive strategies to prolong autonomy and preserve cultural systems. Resistance was both active and adaptive, encompassing diplomacy, armed defense, and the covert maintenance of intellectual and ritual traditions. By the close of the 17th century, the Maya were politically incorporated into the Spanish Empire, yet their language, cosmology, and social customs endured. Communities continued to speak Maya languages, observe ritual cycles, and produce art and craft within local frameworks. These enduring practices ensured that Maya identity persisted beyond the collapse of formal city-states and the imposition of colonial governance. The historical record of encounter and resistance underscores the Maya capacity for resilience, adaptation, and cultural preservation. Military defeat did not equate to the extinction of social or intellectual life. Instead, Maya society transitioned into new forms under colonial rule, retaining core structures of belief, kinship, and communal organization. Though subjugated politically, the Maya spirit endured in culture and language. Conquest changed rule, not memory. Following the imposition of Spanish colonial rule, Maya communities demonstrated remarkable cultural resilience, integrating new religious and social structures while preserving core elements of their worldview. Christian institutions, churches, and saints were introduced across the Yucatán and highland regions. Yet these were often incorporated into existing Maya cosmology. Ritual calendars adapted to align with Catholic feast days, and ceremonial observances frequently fused indigenous deities with saintly figures. Archaeological evidence from syncretic altars, iconography, and colonial-era manuscripts illustrates the persistence of ritual continuity under colonial influence. Agricultural practices and material culture served as additional mechanisms of cultural preservation. Milpa cultivation, terrace farming, and community-managed water systems continued to support subsistence while maintaining seasonal cycles central to ritual observance. Traditional textile production, including backstrap weaving and dyed patterns, preserved symbolic motifs linked to lineage, cosmology, and social identity. Artifacts, including pottery and ceremonial objects, reflect adaptations that incorporated new materials or stylistic influences but remained grounded in long-standing cultural traditions. Oral traditions and storytelling were critical in maintaining collective memory. Histories, myths, and genealogies were transmitted across generations, providing a framework for identity and continuity despite the political subjugation of city-states. The Popol Vuh and Rabbinal Achi, recorded post-conquest but rooted in pre-Columbian narrative structures, exemplify this literary and performative survival. These texts ensured that cosmological knowledge, heroic narratives, and communal values endured, forming a bridge between pre-Columbian and colonial-era cultural expression. Linguistic persistence played a central role in maintaining Maya identity. Languages including Yucatec, Kich, Quechua, and Chol continued to be spoken in households, villages, and ritual settings. Colonial-era records document bilingual communication, the production of religious texts in indigenous languages, and the use of Maya scripts and notation in various forms of record-keeping. The survival of language allowed communities to retain cultural coherence, transmit knowledge, and negotiate colonial structures while reinforcing a sense of shared heritage. This adaptive strategy exemplifies the resilience of Maya society. By selectively integrating external influences while sustaining indigenous knowledge systems, Maya communities preserved essential components of their intellectual, spiritual, and social traditions. Syncretism did not erase native culture. Rather, It allowed Maya identity to evolve and survive under the pressures of colonial authority, epidemic disease, and forced labor systems. Interpretively, cultural survival in the post-classic and colonial period demonstrates the durability of social memory and institutional knowledge. Maya communities maintained continuity in ritual, agriculture, craft, language, and kinship despite the structural collapse of political autonomy. These practices ensured that the Maya identity persisted, providing the foundation for contemporary communities that continue to celebrate language, ritual, and craft centuries later. By sustaining cosmology, oral tradition, and material culture under colonial pressures, the Maya achieved cultural continuity through adaptation. Syncretism, selective integration, and community resilience allowed ancient knowledge and practices to survive alongside imposed European structures. This process of adaptation highlights both the ingenuity and the endurance of Maya society, ensuring that its heritage remained intact well into the modern era. Centuries later, rediscovery would bring the ancient Maya back into the global imagination. Stone by stone, the lost voices of the Maya were heard again. Beginning in the 19th century, explorers and scholars initiated systematic documentation of Maya ruins across Mesoamerica. Figures such as John Lloyd Stephens and Frederick Catherwood produced detailed accounts and illustrations of monumental architecture, stele, and ceremonial complexes. Their publications introduced the global audience to sites including Tikal, Copan, and Chichen Itza, sparking both popular fascination and academic inquiry. These early efforts laid the groundwork for modern archaeological methodology, combining on-site observation, architectural analysis, and careful recording of inscriptions and iconography. The 20th century brought major advances in Maya epigraphy and archaeology. Pioneering work by scholars such as Tatiana Proskoryakov, Yuri Norisov, and David Stewart demonstrated that the Maya hieroglyphic script represented a fully developed writing system capable of recording historical events, dynastic lineages, and calendrical information. This epigraphic breakthrough restored historical agency to the Maya, transforming the perception of their civilization from a mysterious or ritualized society to one with documented political, social, and intellectual complexity. Excavations and LiDAR surveys further revealed urban planning, agricultural infrastructure, and trade networks, providing a multidimensional understanding of Maya society from the pre-classic to post-classic periods. Modern preservation efforts and cultural recognition have reinforced the Maya's enduring legacy. UNESCO World Heritage Sites such as Tikal, Chichen Itza, and Copan protect monumental architecture while supporting research, tourism, and education. Contemporary Maya communities actively engage with this heritage, maintaining language, ritual practice, craft production, and oral histories. Cultural festivals, academic collaborations, and community-led conservation projects highlight the living dimension of Maya identity, linking ancient achievements to contemporary social and spiritual life. Interpretively, the rediscovery and study of Maya civilization underscore the continuity of knowledge, identity, and historical memory. Archaeological and epigraphic evidence demonstrates that the Maya were active agents in shaping their history, and modern scholarship has restored this agency to global understanding. The interplay between field research, epigraphy, and heritage preservation illustrates how historical reconstruction can bridge centuries of disruption, allowing ancient civilizations to inform modern cultural identity. This renewed attention has also emphasized the resilience of Maya society. Despite political collapse, European conquest, and centuries of marginalization, the Maya maintained linguistic, ritual, and social structures that persist today. Archaeological interpretation, combined with ethnographic engagement, demonstrates that ancient knowledge systems continue to influence contemporary Mesoamerican communities, from agricultural practices to ceremonial observances. Through exploration, excavation, and scholarship, the once silent cities now communicate across time. Stone carvings, pyramids, and codices speak to political innovation, cosmology, and artistry that endured despite centuries of disruption. The rediscovery of Maya civilization is not merely an academic achievement. It is a reaffirmation of the Mayas' historical presence and a recognition of their ongoing cultural vitality. Thus ends not the story of disappearance, but one of resilience, a civilization that continues to shape identity across Mesoamerica. If you found this journey through Maya history insightful, consider subscribing for more academically rigorous and cinematic explorations of ancient civilizations. Like, comment, and share to help support historical storytelling that brings the past to life. For deeper engagement, check the description for playlists, references, and sources used in this documentary. And don't forget to hit the notification bell to follow our upcoming episodes on the world's greatest civilizations.